At 8:14 p.m., a choir boy slid my daughter's violin case under the church bathroom stall and whispered, "Mr. Hale, don't ask about Prague again. They keep her in the choir attic now." For a second, I just stared at the gap under the door. Then I looked down. Black case, silver latch, one long white scrape near the handle. I knew that scrape because I put it there myself 11 years earlier trying to get the case out of my truck too fast before Lily's first state recital. The latch bit my thumb open. She laughed so hard she nearly missed warm-up. For years after that, she called the scratch and the scar our matching mistake. I picked the case up with both hands. It was real. Not similar, not familiar, not maybe. Real. By the time I shoved the stall door open, the boy was already gone. All I caught was the back edge of a white robe cutting through the fellowship hall and disappearing into the crowd from the donor gala, swallowed by organ music, applause, and the polished noise of 200 people congratulating themselves for being generous in public. I stood there in a church bathroom with my daughter's violin case in my hands, and the whole last 3 years of my life suddenly feeling soft around the edges. Because my daughter was supposed to be in Prague. Healing, serving, learning how to carry grief without letting it devour her. That was the story. That had always been the story. It was the story my wife told me. It was the story Pastor Cole repeated in that smooth oak voice of his. It was the story printed on every glossy donor pamphlet and folded into every thank you letter I had received after another wire transfer, another mission support check, another round of private contributions to help Lily stay where she was, finally beginning to breathe again. If the boy was telling the truth, then I had not been paying for my daughter's recovery. I had been funding her disappearance. I opened the violin case right there on the sink. The violin was inside. Amber wood. A narrow crack near the chin rest. Blue silk polishing cloth tucked under the fingerboard. 3 old stickers inside the lid from youth competitions Lily used to say were tacky and then refused to remove because winning made tacky feel useful. And beneath the cloth, exactly where she used to hide notes before recitals when she was too nervous to speak, was a single page torn from a church ledger. "Do not ask for me in front of Vanessa. Do not ask for me in front of Pastor Cole. If you want the truth, stay until the building is empty." I read it once, then again, then a third time. My body knew the truth before my mind caught up. My jaw locked. The pulse in my neck started hammering. The room suddenly felt too bright and too narrow. At 58, I had already learned something painful about lies. The most expensive ones do not arrive wearing obvious villainy. They arrive in soft language and patient smiles. They ask for time. They ask for trust. They ask you not to make things harder for someone you love. My name is Daniel Hale. I own Hale Hardware on Mercer Street, 3 blocks from the river, and 1 block from a diner where the night waitress still calls me Danny if she thinks I look tired enough to need it. My father ran that store before me. Before him, my grandfather sold nails and lamp oil out of a narrower room with a dirt basement and a hand-painted sign. I believe in ordinary things, locks that mean what they mean, keys that only open one door, cash drawers that close square, shelves that hold the weight they promise to hold, people saying yes when they mean yes and no when they mean no. That used to feel like a simple way to live. Then my first wife died. Then my daughter fell in love with a man who died before he could marry her. Then I married a woman who knew how to make control sound like care. Then a pastor with good hair and cleaner hands than any man speaking that much about sacrifice should have decided grief was just another tool if you applied it carefully enough. Lily was 26 when she was supposed to leave for Prague. 26. Sharp-minded, quick-tongued, good with a violin and better with a receipt book. She could smell fake concern before most people finished the first sentence, which was probably why she and Vanessa never truly managed peace. Lily had her mother's ear for music and my stubbornness. That is a dangerous combination to give a girl. It makes her hard to fool and harder to steer. Her mother, Elise, used to say Lily came into the world offended by weak logic. Elise taught piano lessons in our front room and could tell within 4 notes whether a child had practiced honestly or creatively. She died 7 years ago of an aneurysm so sudden that for the first month after the funeral, I still turned to tell her things, and only then remembered there was nowhere to turn. Lily took that death like some people take a broken rib. You keep breathing because there is no other choice, but every ordinary motion reminds you something inside you is not right yet. We got closer after Elise died, not softer, closer. She worked part-time at the store, ran invoices, painted the back office cabinets dark green because she said beige was not a color, it was surrender. Brought her violin into the shop on slow Saturdays and played while I sorted bolts or sharpened blades just to annoy the customers who claimed hardware stores had no culture. Then she met Ben Caro. Ben did commercial carpentry and could build a staircase that looked like it had always belonged in a house. He had hands like sandpaper and a laugh that traveled fast. The first time he came to dinner, he fixed our back gate without being asked, and then apologized as if doing useful things in another man's yard without permission might count as arrogance. I liked him immediately. That should have bought him a longer life. He and Lily were engaged 11 months later. She showed me the ring in the aisle between extension cords and drop cloths, because she said she wanted me to be part of the first 5 seconds before everyone else turned it into an event. I hugged her so hard she complained about my shirt buttons pressing into her shoulder. Then Ben died on Route 83 in November rain, when a truck crossed the median and erased the next version of my daughter's life before she even got to try it on. That kind of grief is not graceful. People like to make songs and movies as if heartbreak arrives draped in moonlight and noble silence. It does not. It throws plates, it stares at walls, it stops bathing, it asks vicious questions of God in parking lots and then feels embarrassed because the parking lot was full. Lily moved back into my house for a while after the funeral. She slept badly, barely played. Worked only when the store was empty because customers offering sympathy made her jaw lock. Vanessa arrived in our lives during that period, already practiced at being indispensable. She had been on the church hospitality committee when Elise died. She brought casseroles that somehow never tasted homemade, but always looked expensive. She remembered birthdays. She sent thank you notes that made gratitude sound like an achievement she had personally supervised. By the time I married her 2 years later, half the town was telling me I had done well for myself. Maybe I had, if what I wanted was the appearance of order. Vanessa is beautiful in the way some women are when every part of them has been edited for effect. Not flashy, refined. Hair always controlled, voice always half a degree softer than necessary. She knew which sleeve to touch, which pause to leave, which concern to express in front of exactly the right witness. My daughter saw through her much earlier than I did. She performs kindness, Lily told me once after a Christmas fundraiser. She doesn't feel it. She stages it. I told her she was being unfair. That is one of the many sentences men like me use when what we really mean is, I would prefer peace to accuracy. Pastor Nathan Cole arrived next. Tall, silver at the temples, voice like polished wood. The kind of man who never rushed a sentence because he understood that time itself can be used as authority. When Lily's grief turned jagged and ugly after Ben died, Cole entered it the way certain men enter a storm they did not create, but immediately begin naming as if they own the weather. He said Lily's mourning had become identity-based. That was his phrase. Identity-based. He said she was attaching herself to pain because pain was the last place Ben still felt reachable. He said family love sometimes becomes emotional interference. He said healing may require sacred distance from old rooms, old streets, old roles. He said what sounded cruel at first often turned out to be mercy when viewed through a longer lens. Then he looked at me across my own kitchen table and said, "If you want your daughter back, Daniel, you may have to stop insisting she heal where your guilt can see her." That line lodged itself in me. That is what clever predators do. They do not always sell you a lie. Sometimes they sell you a sharper version of your own shame and then rent it back to you at a profit. Within a month, the story of Prague was born. A church-connected conservatory mission, music outreach, women recovering from grief and mental strain through faith, discipline, and distance. Private housing, no family contact early on, no calls, no visits, only letters once Lily found stability. Vanessa cried when she told me Lily had agreed. Cole placed one hand over mine and said, "She is not abandoning you. She is choosing to return in one piece." That sounded holy enough to make stupidity look like sacrifice. I wrote the first check that same week, $40,000. Mission housing, instruction, travel, special pastoral supervision. Confidential medical support because public systems do not understand spiritual collapse. I sold stock from the store to cover it. Extension ladders, seasonal grills, a whole pallet of fence stain I had been sitting on for spring. I told myself fathers like me are supposed to absorb damage quietly if it buys our daughters another chance at life. At first, the letters came exactly often enough to keep hope alive and not often enough to satisfy reason. "Dear Dad, Prague is quieter than home. Dear Dad, I need you not to rescue me from what is finally helping. Dear Dad, please do not make this harder by insisting love must always look like presents. Dear Dad, Vanessa has been kinder to me than I deserved. Dear Dad, Pastor Cole says grief softens when it stops being watched." The words looked like Lily from across the street. Up close, the walk was wrong. Too careful, too church, too much surrender, and not enough irritation. My daughter had never used the word soften in her life without attaching an insult to it. Still, grief is fertile ground for self-deception. You do not read what is on the page, you read what lets you survive the afternoon. So I kept paying. Every quarter a new need. Extended instruction, winter lodging, private retreat housing, medication outside the mission budget, travel between sites, emergency support for a women's music residency that existed, according to Cole, partly to protect Lily from the curiosity of the outside world. If I asked for specifics, I got language. If I asked for a call, I got concern. If I asked when she might come home, Vanessa squeezed my wrist and told me not to pull Lily backward just because I missed the earlier version of her. That phrase began to make my skin crawl by the second year. Earlier version. As if my daughter were software. As if grief had simply made her outdated, and these people were downloading a cleaner edition in Europe where I had no right to inspect the process. The letters kept coming, the money kept going, and somewhere in the middle of that slow theft, I learned how expensive it is to doubt a story you have already spent too much money to question. There were other signs before the violin case. I hate that now, because once truth lands, memory suddenly becomes eager to look competent. It begins volunteering things you ignored, as if negligence can be corrected after the fact, by sharper recollection. The first Christmas after Prague, Vanessa insisted we put Lily's framed conservatory acceptance letter on the piano in the front room. Not the one from college, the mission version, cream paper, blue seal. 3 paragraphs of language that sounded too ceremonial for young musicians and too vague for an actual school. I remember standing there with a box of ornaments in my hands and thinking the whole thing looked more like a fundraising insert than an acceptance packet. Then I hung the lights anyway. That is how cowardice often behaves in ordinary houses. It does not always refuse the truth. Sometimes it simply keeps decorating around it. Vanessa got good at making Lily's absence feel almost fashionable. If neighbors asked, she lowered her voice and said Prague the way some people say hospice. If church friends asked, she added words like formation, restoration, and sacred distance. If donors asked, she called it a women's conservatory mission and tilted her head just enough to make curiosity feel crude. Every version protected the same thing. No follow-up questions. By the second year, she had started receiving little packets from Lily at the house. Soap from Europe, a silk bookmark, a tiny ornament shaped like an angel, a postcard with no handwriting on the picture side and 3 careful paragraphs on the back that always sounded less like my daughter than my daughter translated through a panel of church consultants. Once she sent a photograph of a narrow street after rain. Vanessa held it out to me at breakfast and said, "See, she's finally somewhere quiet." I looked at the street and thought only this. There are no people in it, no motion, no store signs, nothing local. It could have been Prague or Pittsburgh or a stock image from a calendar no one bought. Still, I put it on the fridge, because to challenge a photograph is to admit you no longer trust the entire architecture around it, and I was not ready for that kind of demolition yet. Then came the voice memo. Year 2, late spring, a Friday. The store had just closed. Vanessa came into the office where I was counting drawer cash and said, with that solemn softness of hers, "Lily managed a recording today. Please do not call back. Marcus says hearing your immediate reaction could unsettle her." Then she handed me her phone like she was passing me a relic. The memo lasted 23 seconds. I know because I listened to it 11 times that night and counted again each time as if math might restore my child to it. Lily's voice was there. I am not denying that, but it was flattened, spoken too carefully, as if each word had been placed on a tray before being allowed into the air. She said she was grateful for patience. She said distance was helping her hear herself again. Then she said, "Please tell Dad the quieter I become, the closer I get to coming home correctly." Correctly. That word bothered me for weeks. Lily had never spoken about herself like a product going through quality control. When she was 12, she once told a piano adjudicator that music could be wrong and still be honest, which got her marked down for attitude and raised 3 inches taller in my estimation. Correctly was not her word. It was a system word, a maintenance word, a word people use when they are shaping something to fit a shelf. I nearly called that same night anyway. Got as far as standing in the kitchen with my hand on the wall phone and Vanessa watching me from the doorway in her robe. She did not tell me not to call. That was too crude. She just said, "If you need to relieve your fear by costing Lily a stable week, I cannot stop you." Then she went back upstairs, and because guilt is lazier than courage, I stayed exactly where I was. There was another sign in year 3. I tried to visit Prague. Not a full surprise, not dramatically. I told Vanessa I had supplier meetings in Berlin through a cousin of a paint rep, and I wondered whether I might route through Lily's city afterward if her program allowed a meal in a public place. I expected resistance. What I did not expect was how fast the resistance came. Within 3 hours, Pastor Cole was in my office at the store, one hand resting on a box of deck screws like scripture could be improved by hardware. He said travel at the wrong point in a grief cycle can function like reopening a fracture without anesthesia. He said Lily had only just stabilized her attachment responses. He said international surprise visits, often read as paternal repossession attempts among women recovering from identity collapse. I remember staring at him while he said that and thinking, my daughter has become a language laboratory for this man. No person left in the room. Just a set of theories with my last name attached. And still I did not throw him out. I argued, yes. I got angry, yes. But in the end I let him leave with his dignity intact and mine partly rented out to him again. The next week, a package arrived from Prague. Inside was a wool scarf, a church newsletter in Czech that looked too untouched, and a note from Lily telling me she had heard about my possible visit, and it made her feel hunted instead of loved. Hunted. That did it. I folded. Completely. Because fathers like me can survive suspicion more easily than we can survive the possibility that our love feels predatory to our own child. If you want to stop a decent man from asking questions, that is one of the sharpest knives available. Make him fear that his concern feels violent. He will put himself down faster than most jailers can. By the 4th year, Lily's absence had become a usable asset around church. That is the sentence that still shames me most because I was inside it while it happened. Pastor Cole would mention the Prague Conservatory from the pulpit when he preached on surrender. Vanessa hosted small donor dinners where women dabbed their eyes while she described a gifted young artist learning not to drown in worldly attachment. There was a framed map in the fellowship hall with pins for missions the church claimed to support, and Lily's city had a gold one instead of red, as if her pain required premium branding. Sometimes after service, strangers would tell me they were praying for my daughter's brave continental healing, and I would thank them with the numb professionalism of a man handling returns for items he never stocked. That was around when I started noticing Ezra. Not yet the boy from the bathroom stall. Just a thin kid with alert eyes and choir posture that always looked half ready to bolt. He sang treble then, sharp ear, never smiled when Vanessa praised him. Once, after a donor luncheon, I saw him carrying folding chairs while everyone else his age was outside near the snow cone truck. Vanessa said he volunteered because discipline gave him peace. The boy's face said discipline gave somebody else peace. I did not have words for that at the time. Only a vague dislike that I filed under church discomfort and ignored like another coward. The money kept changing shape. At first it had been direct mission support, then private conservatory supplement, then instrument maintenance, therapeutic travel, women's retreat scholarship gaps, medical stipends, emergency winter housing, and one especially insulting invoice marked relational boundary support. I remember looking at that line item and thinking, I appear to be paying for the luxury of not speaking to my own child. Then I paid it. That is the worst part. Not that they wrote it, that I wrote the check anyway. Year 5 brought the first time Vanessa used Lily against my property openly enough for me to feel the outline before I understood the picture. She said the church board was still dreaming about an annex, and that if the warehouse ever left my hands, what a beautiful legacy it would be if some corner of it served music and restoration instead of storage and loading docks. I said the warehouse still stored half my seasonal inventory. She smiled and answered, buildings can become what they were always meant to be once grief stops owning them. At the time, I thought she meant me. I did not yet understand she was already speaking the church's future sales language out loud in my kitchen. Then there was the gala itself, the one before the bathroom stall. People forget now that before it became evidence, it was simply another evening of round tables, donor envelopes, floating candles, too much quartet music, and wealthy people congratulating one another for caring elegantly. Vanessa wore navy silk. Cole worked the room like a man harvesting confidence. And I stood there with a check in my pocket I had not yet signed, because something in me had finally gotten tired of paying for soft light and vague nouns. I think that was why Ezra chose me. Not because I was noble, because I was slow and still enough to look reachable. Predators rid rooms, yes. So do children who have learned exactly which adults are sleepwalking and which ones might be close to waking. When he slipped me the violin case, he was not choosing the bravest man in the church. He was choosing the one whose face already looked like a story was cracking under it. That matters to me now. Because people always want a cleaner origin for courage than reality provides. They want the moment the hero knew. The truth is uglier. I knew in pieces. I knew in invoices. I knew in wrong words and framed maps and postcards with no weather in them. I knew in a child's tight shoulders and a pastor's habit of answering simple questions with polished fog. I knew enough to feel wrong and still not enough to act. Then a boy put my daughter's real violin in my hands and left me nowhere decent to hide from myself. Now I was standing in a church bathroom with my daughter's violin case in my hands and one torn page from a ledger telling me the story had been local all along. I looked at myself in the mirror, suit, tie, donation pin from the gala still on my lapel. A face I recognized and did not like much. Then I tucked the note into my wallet, closed the violin case, washed my hands for no reason at all, and walked back out into the fellowship hall to finish smiling at people who would not have understood why I suddenly wanted to burn the building down, with perfect Christian courtesy, still seated at all its round tables. I did not ask another question that night. Not in front of Vanessa, not in front of Cole, not in front of the board members, the choir parents, the donors, the city councilman, or the widow from First National who had just pledged another $20,000 to continental restoration work. I shook hands. I nodded. I listened to Pastor Cole praise absence as if he had invented the concept. I watched Vanessa move through the room in ivory silk like she belonged in every glance. And the entire time I felt the weight of the violin case under the table beside my chair like a second heart beating the wrong rhythm. At 10:30, the last dessert plates were cleared. At 10:45, the city councilman left. At 11, the board chair hugged Vanessa and told her the church had never looked stronger. At 11:10, the choir children were gathered and sent home with parents or older siblings. I stayed, quietly. When Vanessa asked why, I said I had promised Arthur Penn I would look over the sketches for the new donor annex before making a final decision on the matching gift. That got her attention. Arthur Penn chaired the church board and had been circling me for months about the empty warehouse behind my hardware store. The church wanted it for rehearsal rooms, donor offices, and some grand arts fellowship Pastor Cole kept describing as a future beacon if only the right men stopped being so attached to square footage and legacy. Vanessa smiled when I mentioned it, not warmly, hungrily. "Take all the time you need," she said. "This could become the thing Lily comes home to." There are moments when you discover the sentence itself has teeth. That was one of them. By 11:20, the building was finally thinning out. Vanessa left in the dark green town car she saved for events where elegance needed to be parked at an angle. Cole stayed behind, or so I assumed, because the office wing remained lit. At 11:31, the same choir boy appeared at the end of the hallway and jerked his chin once toward the north stairwell. Then he vanished again. I picked up the violin case and followed him. The north stairwell was the one nobody used unless they worked in maintenance, hauled folding chairs, or knew the building well enough to ignore the pretty entrances, concrete steps, half-dead bulbs, smell of dust and old varnish. The kind of staircase churches never put in brochures because it reminds people holiness still requires plumbing and storage. I climbed one flight, then another. At the landing above the choir loft, I saw the boy waiting beside a narrow service door, half hidden behind stacked nativity scenery. He could not have been older than 12. Freckles, choir robe gone now, plaid shirt underneath, a face still soft with childhood except for the eyes, which had already learned the bad habit of checking corners before speaking. "Are you Ezra?" I asked. He nodded. "Did Lily send you?" Another quick nod. "Is she here?" He swallowed, then said, "You have to go alone from here. If Pastor sees me, he'll know I told." That sentence hit me harder than it should have because of how ordinary it sounded in his mouth. Not dramatic, not frightened the way a movie would do it, just practical. Just the sentence of a child who had already done the math on adult retaliation and learned to speak inside its margins. I crouched a little so I would not tower over him. "Did she tell you why she wants me here?" "No." He looked at the violin case. "She just said if you saw that, you would believe it was really her." He hesitated, then added, "She said not to trust the soft voice if it's hers, but too calm." "What does that mean?" He shook his head. "Sometimes they make her read things when she's tired." The air in the stairwell changed around that sentence. He pointed down the short service corridor. "Last door on the left. There's another room inside that room. Knock once, then wait. If she says no, go in anyway." That is a strange instruction to receive about your own child. If she says no, go in anyway. I wanted to ask 100 questions. Instead, I said, "Where are your parents?" "My mom thinks I'm helping stack programs." "Why are you doing this?" He looked away, then back at me. "Because she taught me scales through the heating vent when I had to sit outside punishment choir, and because she told me my hands were too small for badness to stick to if I kept them busy." That was such a Lily sentence, I nearly sat down on the dirty stair right there. He stepped back. "I should go." "Ezra," I said. He stopped. "If anything goes wrong tonight, you tell your mother the truth before anyone else tells it for you." He gave me a look too old for his face. "In this church," he said quietly, "grown-ups always tell it first." Then he was gone. I stood alone in that corridor with the violin case in my hand and the building suddenly sounding different around me. Air vent hum, wood settling. Somewhere below, an organ note as a technician shut something down. The little working noises of a place that had fooled me for years. The door Ezra pointed to was painted the same beige as the hallway. No plaque, no window. No reason for a donor like me to have ever paid attention to it. I knocked once, no answer. Then, from somewhere deeper inside, a woman's voice said, "Go away." I had not heard my daughter speak in person for 3 years. There are some voices you carry in the bones no matter what time does to them. That was Lily, thinner, worn down, but Lily. My hand shook on the knob. "Lily," I said. Silence. Then the sound of something metal hitting wood. A chair, maybe, or a bowl. "Go away." She said again, and this time I heard it. Not anger, panic wearing irritation because panic had been forced to dress itself before speaking. I opened the door. The outer room used to be robe storage, I think. Shelves on 2 walls, folding tables, music stands, one weak lamp screwed too high into the wall. Everything had been cleaned past the point of normal use, not tidy, controlled, order as camouflage. And at the back was another door, narrower, heavier, a lock plate mounted on the outside. I stared at that for exactly one heartbeat before my mind refused to soften it into anything less ugly. Then I crossed the room and opened it. The attic chamber was longer than it was wide, tucked under the church roofline with the slanted ceiling cutting the room down on both sides. 2 dormer windows had been fitted with frosted panels and heavy interior latches. There was a bed, a desk, a metal wardrobe, a sink, shelves with hymnals and staff paper, a violin stand, a chair, a rug, a reading lamp on a timer switch. Not a cell if you wanted to lie about it, not a home if you wanted to tell the truth. My daughter was standing beside the bed with one hand gripping the blanket hard enough to whiten her knuckles. Her hair was shorter than she ever wore it. Not stylishly short, managed short. Her face looked thinner and older around the eyes. She wore a gray skirt and a cream sweater that could have belonged to a choir director or a patient or a woman in hiding. For a second I could not move because every version of her I had kept alive in my mind over the last 3 years was both right and wrong at the same time. "Dad?" she said. Just that one word. I took one step. She flinched. Not away from me exactly. More like her body had reached for an old impact before her mind could stop it. I stopped immediately. "It's me," I said, hating how stupid those 2 words sounded when the room itself was doing most of the speaking. "I know it's you." Her voice was shaking now. "You shouldn't be here." I looked at the lock plate on the outside door, then at the latches on the windows, then at her. Lily. Tears filled her eyes instantly, which made her look younger for the first time in years. "Please don't do the angry version first." That sentence gutted me, because it meant she knew me well enough to predict what came next. It also meant she had spent 3 years around people who taught her anger was the most dangerous part of rescue. So I swallowed it. Or enough of it to speak. "How long?" 3 years. "No," I said. "Not the mission story. How long in this room?" She wiped her face with the heel of her hand. "Here? On and off 2 years and 4 months. Before that, the retreat house outside Lancaster. Before that, 2 different apartments they called transition housing." "Transition to what?" She laughed once, dry sound. "Compliance, apparently." I took another step, slower this time. She let me. Then I set the violin case down, and she looked at it like seeing part of herself from the outside hurt more than seeing me. "I thought they'd thrown it out," she said. "Ezra brought it." Her mouth twitched. "He's braver than he should be." I wanted to hug her. I wanted to pick her up and carry her out. I wanted to march downstairs and break Pastor Cole's jaw against the polished little donor table he loved so much. Instead, I asked the only question big enough to deserve the room. "What is this?" She looked at the ceiling. Not because the answer was up there, because the words clearly hurt to bring back down. "This," she said finally, "is what happens when grief makes you useful to the wrong people." I sat in the chair because my legs did not trust themselves and because standing over her felt like another kind of pressure she did not need. "Tell me everything." She shook her head at once. "No, not everything, not tonight. If you try to take everything tonight, you'll miss the part that matters most." "What matters most?" "That you don't let them know I told you before we take away what they can still destroy." There it was again, not rescue first, evidence first. It made a horrible kind of sense. I looked around the room more carefully. Desk neatly stacked with copied scores, small pill organizer, several folders, a church schedule taped inside the wardrobe door. No phone, no visible computer, no pictures except one print of St. Cecilia and one torn corner of something blue tucked into the mirror frame. "What did they tell me Prague was?" "A business model," she said. I stared at her. She sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on knees the way she used to sit on the counter at the store when she was about to tell me a customer had tried to return a rake after using it for a season. "Dad," she said quietly, "there was never a Prague conservatory. There was a rental mailbox in Prague, a website, 2 photos bought from a string program in Brno, and letters Vanessa wrote from templates Pastor Cole kept in a folder called Restoration Voice." For one full second, I actually felt the blood leave my face. The letters, some were mine at first, then not, then half mine after they got me tired enough, then not again. She looked at her hands. They figured out pretty early that written surrender was more valuable than spoken resistance. I wanted to ask how. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to ask who else knew. I wanted to ask whether she had been hurt in ways I would not survive hearing about while still sitting in reach of the door. Instead, I said, "Start where it started." She nodded slowly. "The week after Ben died, Vanessa started sleeping in the guest room at your house twice a week, remember?" I did. At the time, she had called it practical, too late after church meetings to drive back across town, wanting to help if Lily had another night where she broke plates or sat in the shower with her clothes on. I remember. She started bringing me tea, smoothies, supplements, vitamins. She said grief burns through the body, and Pastor Cole knew a doctor who helped women like me avoid spiritual collapse. "Marcus?" She looked up sharply. "You know his name?" "I've heard it." Soft voice, good watch. Man who believes every problem improves if you move it somewhere harder to inspect. To my surprise, Lily smiled, barely. but enough to put a knife through me because it was the first real expression I had seen on her face. That sounds like him. She took a breath and kept going. At first, Marcus sounded almost reasonable. Sleep support, anxiety control, structured days. He said trauma makes reality unreliable in the early months, and decisions should be narrowed for my own good. Vanessa and Cole backed him on everything. I was too tired to fight the shape of it. Too guilty, too. Ben had died and I was still here, and everybody around me kept treating that like a wound with no bottom. She folded her hands, then unfolded them. I found the money by accident, she said. That turned the whole room. What money? The church money, donor funds, scholarship money, mission expansion money. She looked at me. And your warehouse. Now I leaned forward. What about my warehouse? Pastor Cole wanted it for years. The church parking lot ends one parcel short of Mercer Lane, and your warehouse is the missing piece. Vanessa knew that before she ever married you. She was on the expansion subcommittee with Cole and Arthur Penn 6 months before you started dating her. I stared at my daughter as if a new face might emerge if I held still long enough. She saw it happen and nodded once. I know. Sit with it later. There's more. She told me she had gone into the church office one afternoon 2 months after Ben's death to drop off receipts from a fundraiser Vanessa had asked her to sort. Lily was always good with numbers when she was too sad to be good with conversation. She noticed one donor pledge entered twice under different entities, then another, then scholarship disbursements assigned to students who never appeared on performance rosters. Then a property study with my warehouse highlighted in yellow and the note ideal donor bridge if family attachment neutralized. I felt every muscle in my back go hard at once. Family attachment neutralized. Yes, meaning you, meaning me, meaning you, meaning anyone who made the deal sentimental instead of strategic. She looked away for the first time. I confronted Vanessa that night. That part, she said, went badly faster than she had expected. Vanessa did not panic, did not deny, did not even sound surprised. She just asked Lily whether she had told me yet. When Lily said no, Vanessa told her that was very wise because grief already made people doubt her stability, and accusations without proof would only feed the ugliest story in town. Then Cole came in, then Marcus. Then the language began. You are exhausted, you are activated, you are seeing pattern where there is only burden. You need somewhere quiet before you damage what little trust you have left. Lily told me the first place they took her was not the attic. That came later, after the softer rooms failed. Predators almost always prefer gentler architecture first because gentler architecture preserves deniability. If a woman can be made to sit in a nice room and repeat the lie herself, why waste a lock? The first house belonged to a widow from the church who spent winters in Florida and summers pretending not to ask why her utilities were so strange in April. Marcus called it a transition cottage. Vanessa called it somewhere the town could not keep bleeding on her. Lily called it, in hindsight, the first place where my daughterhood started getting billed as a symptom. For the first 2 weeks, they were careful. Actual meals, actual sleep medication, a real therapist twice, though not 3 times because the therapist began asking independent questions about why family contact was being routed entirely through pastoral authority and never came back after that. Marcus replaced her with himself almost immediately. He said familiarity reduced destabilizing narrative competition. That phrase makes me sick even now. It means he wanted no second voice in the room strong enough to compete with the script he was building around Lily. He began by making himself the interpreter of her grief. Every feeling had to move through him before it could count. If she was angry, he called it displaced panic. If she was suspicious, he called it trauma patterning. If she wanted to come home, he called it regression toward dependency. If she asked for me, he called it a temporary paternal fixation made more dangerous by my unresolved bereavement. He weaponized my dead wife too, apparently. I learned that and had to sit in silence for nearly a minute because some kinds of rage need furniture to survive them. Lily said the medications changed around the 3rd week. Nothing dramatic at first, just enough fog to soften edges. Sleep became thicker, mornings slower. The distance between one thought and the next widened until she started trusting the people who could supply continuity through the haze. That is another thing captivity does when it learns professional language. It does not always beat clarity out of you. Sometimes it simply makes your own mind so expensive to cross that you start borrowing someone else's bridge. Vanessa came every evening at 6:20. Not 6, not 6:30, 6:20. Lily remembered that because the woman treated time like moral proof. If she arrived exactly when she promised, it made the rest of the arrangement easier to mistake for care. She brought food, letters, church updates, and what she called good news packets. At first, the packets contained choir photos, donor cards, and printouts about how healing environments reduce reactivity. Later, they contained draft letters Lily was too tired to finish, and donor testimonials from women she had never met, but was told should inspire her toward gratitude. Gratitude became the first major lock. If Lily complained, She was told she was disrespecting the number of people sacrificing to keep her safe. Once money enters a prison, every feeling inside it begins getting audited. The name change came almost by accident, or at least that is how Marcus sold it. He said Lily Reed carried too much civic visibility inside Mercer, too much expectation, too much local story. For a while he asked whether she might consider using her middle name in the women's correspondence packet. Then Vanessa suggested Miriam because it sounded scriptural and musically old. Soon the letters were being drafted as if she had already agreed. Sister Miriam sends thanks. Sister Miriam is progressing through silence. Sister Miriam asks for prayer instead of contact. What began as tone management turned into identity laundering in under a month. Lily told me the moment she first heard Vanessa use Miriam to another donor through a cracked office door felt worse than any sedative. A drug can blur you. A new name can witness you being erased in real time. There was 1 week early, when Lily nearly got out. A board member's wife named Helen Price came to the cottage with soup and actual concern, which is always dangerous to predators because concern tends to ask rude, practical questions on instinct. Helen asked why a mission scholarship recipient recovering in sacred distance had no music stand in the room, no current lesson plan, and no passport on file with the mission binder she had casually requested to organize. That last question bought Helen a fast pastoral correction and a marital silence campaign so efficient she apologized to Lily the following Sunday for misunderstanding the form of care being attempted. Marcus apparently told the Prices that boundaries become harder to maintain when outsiders eroticize rescue. Only a certain kind of educated monster could make concern sound indecent with a straight face. When the church realized the cottage could still be stumbled over by the wrong casserole, they moved Lily to the first church-owned house under a donor name. That house had no obvious prison feel either. 2 bedrooms, piano in the front room, window treatments too expensive for a nonprofit and too cheap for the narrative they sold. Marcus introduced written reflections there. Morning state, shame inventory, attachment pressure, gratitude calibration, future readiness. Every category pushed in the same direction. Your feelings are not trustworthy until the people managing you say they are. If that sentence sounds familiar, it is because it is the whole religion of coercive control translated into stationery. Lily tried to write against it at first. She crossed out words, added sarcasm in margins, replaced healing with maintenance more than once just to see whether anyone read closely. They did. Vanessa came in one afternoon carrying 3 of the pages and said, smiling, "If your written tone keeps telling on your internal resistance, Marcus will have to reevaluate whether music remains stabilizing for you." That was the first explicit threat to the violin. Lily said she still feels ashamed of how fast she corrected after that. I told her survival adjusts faster than pride and shame is often just rage that got forced indoors. She wrote that down later and said it was the first useful sentence I had given her in years. Fair enough. The attic came after the church bought the Bryn Mawr townhouse and realized the public story needed a center inside the building itself. A daughter in Europe is useful for donations. A daughter who can be physically staged, recorded, dressed, and hidden 30 feet above the choir loft is useful for management. The attic started as overflow storage with insulation and old pageant costumes. Then renovations turned it into a soft prison. Insulated wall, desk, narrow bed, small sink, vents that carried music up and conversation sideways. Enough comfort to confuse sympathy from outsiders. Enough control to make leaving feel both difficult and somehow morally disallowed. Vanessa loved the attic because it allowed her to live 2 floors below the disappearance while still dressing for donor brunch. That was where the letter production became systematic. Marcus drafted emotional objectives. Vanessa adjusted tone. Sometimes Cole added 1 sentence near the end to pull the whole thing toward spiritual glamour. Lily was allowed to keep her handwriting because handwriting tests make liars nervous, and donors apparently like authenticity most when it can be folded into envelopes for them. If she resisted, access to music went first, then access to sunlight, then any mention of my name. Later, once Ezra and the other children began getting used as corridor witnesses, access to their drawings became another lever. The machine did not stay one machine. It kept learning. That is why she calls it architecture now, instead of merely cruelty. Cruelty can be impulsive. Architecture remembers what worked. The first time Lily heard her Prague letters read aloud at a donor dinner from the attic vent, she nearly screamed. She said hearing her own words below her in Cole's voice felt like being turned into a sermon illustration, while still alive enough to know the sermon was lying. That was also the night she heard Vanessa ask whether the Hale parcel should be discussed as an eventual legacy alignment in donor language, rather than anticipated acquisition, because the first phrasing felt warmer and less predatory to old men. That was when Lily realized my property had never been a side ambition. It was one of the spine pieces from the beginning. Marry Daniel. Stabilize his grief. Neutralize the daughter. Protect the warehouse until the center has enough sentiment attached to it that surrender looks noble instead of manipulated. Predators love a long horizon when the money at the far end of it is large enough. She asked me then if I wanted to know the ugliest part. I said yes, because by that point ugliness was the only honest currency left in the room. She told me Vanessa used to bring donor brochures to the attic and practice lines in front of her. Not for sympathy. For calibration. She would read a paragraph about restoration and then ask Lily, too much mother language or just enough? She used my daughter as an editorial instrument for her own fraud. When Lily went blank from rage, Vanessa would smile and say, "Good. None plays well in print. It reads expensive." There are crimes the law knows how to sentence and crimes that belong mostly to God because statutes do not yet have language ugly enough. That sentence is one of those for me. By the second year in the attic, routine replaced surprise. That was when the real danger started. A person can survive terror for a while. Systematized smallness is harder. Breakfast at 7:10, journal by 8, silence window until 10 unless directed otherwise, music if compliant, correspondence if calm, recorded testimony if donors required proof of flourishing. Lily said the worst days were not the violent ones. They were the ones that almost felt normal, because almost is how cages become furniture. She began measuring time not by dates but by what category of self she was being sold as that week. Broken artist, tender witness, restored daughter, fragile vessel, European testimony. She said once she caught herself trying to decide which of those versions of herself might deserve more soup and had to sit on the floor for an hour until self-disgust passed through her body like a fever. That was when she started hiding notes in the violin case and stealing tiny pieces of actual reality from wherever she could find them. Not because she had a clean escape plan, because if you cannot flee yet, you start caching truth, piece by piece, until one day the cache is large enough to become a door. "I should have come to you anyway," she said. "I know that. You were grieving. I was also stupid." "No," her eyes snapped to mine. "Dad, don't turn me into a child just because I'm in a room." I took that hit because she had earned it. "You're right," I said. "Say it the way you need it said." She looked down, then said, "I was grief-sick and angry and easier to move than I should have been." That was honest enough to trust. They got her into one rest house first, then another, then a so-called mission residence where every letter home was monitored and every objection became proof she needed another layer of care. When she kept asking about the donor records, Marcus started calling it fixation. When she asked about Ben and said she wanted police, Cole said worldly systems punish unstable women first and facts later. When she demanded to come home, Vanessa told her coming home meant destroying me, destroying the church, and turning Ben's death into a public carnival with her at the center. "And then," I asked, "and then they learned what worked." Her voice dropped. "They learned that if they tied my access to you to calmness, and tied my access to music to obedience, and tied my access to the outside to whatever version of the story they needed that week, I could be trained to wait." The word trained sat there between us like an open flame. I looked at the pill organizer on the desk, the folders, the copied scores, the lock. "How many people know you're here?" "A few. Not the whole church. That's important. Most of them believe the Prague story. A handful think I'm in a private vows program for women in spiritual recovery. Ezra knows because choir kids notice everything. A maintenance man knew until he got fired. Arthur Penn knows enough to avoid the third floor and not ask why new locks keep appearing in budget lines." "Does Vanessa come up here?" "Yes." "Cole?" "Yes." "Marcus?" "Less now. He only comes when they need my tone adjusted before an event." I closed my eyes briefly because if I looked at her the whole time, I was afraid I would lose the narrow piece of calm she needed from me. "What did you mean when you said not to let them know before we take away what they can still destroy?" Lily stood and crossed to the wardrobe. From the inside hem of a plain gray skirt hanging there, she pulled a narrow envelope and handed it to me. Inside were copies, not originals. Copies. 2 board memos, 1 bank transfer summary, 3 donor letters in Vanessa's handwriting with my daughter's name typed at the bottom, a draft brochure for something called the Hale Center for Sacred Strings, my warehouse address printed in bold under proposed future home. I looked up so fast the room tilted. "Next Friday," Lily said. "That's why the gala tonight mattered. They're closing the final pledge list. They plan to announce the center next week with your name on it and my story as proof of what the church's European restoration work can do." I heard myself laugh once. Mean sound. A laugh a man makes when the knife finally goes all the way in and there is nothing left to do but admire how cleanly he had been opened. "They used my dead wife's daughter to sell me my own warehouse." "Yes," Lily said quietly. "And if you storm downstairs tonight, they'll shred the real ledgers, wipe the donor drives, and tell everyone grief made me paranoid again. We need them talking before they know the stage has changed." The stage. There was my daughter again, even here, thinking in lines and structures and how people reveal themselves when they still believe they are directing the scene. I stood up slowly. What do you need from me? The answer came instantly. You need to leave exactly the way you came in. You need to act like nothing changed. You need to tell Vanessa you want to think harder about the matching gift. You need someone who understands nonprofit fraud, not church gossip, not small-town suspicion fraud. And you need to come back tomorrow with a way for me to pass things out without Ezra taking all the risk. I looked at her for a long moment. Anything else? She hesitated. Then, in a voice so small it almost undid me, she said, Bring me one thing that hasn't been chosen for me. I looked around the room. There's nothing here I trust. No, she said, not for the room, for me. I thought about it for exactly 1 second. Coffee, I said. This time she actually smiled, tiny, tired, real. Black, she said. No church tea, no lemon, no calming anything. I nodded, then asked the question I had been avoiding since I opened the inner door. Can I hug you? She looked like the answer might split her. Then she stepped forward anyway. I held her carefully. Not because I was afraid of breaking her, because I was afraid she had spent too long being held only in ways that cost something after. When I finally let go, she pressed her forehead once against my shoulder the way she used to when she was 12, and pretending she was too old for comfort while still quietly taking it. Then she straightened and said, businesslike now, because businesslike was clearly how she survived herself. Go. So I picked up the empty violin case and walked back through the outer room, down the service corridor, down the stairwell, and out into the midnight parking lot where my wife's absence had never looked so accusing before. I sat in my truck for almost 10 minutes before I turned the key. Then I drove home and spent the whole way relearning what the word revenge might actually mean when the people you want to destroy are still holding the only version of your daughter that has managed to stay alive. I did not sleep. That is the lazy version. The truer one is that I lay in my own bed with my shoes still on until 3 a.m, got up, drank bad coffee from the machine Vanessa hated, sat at my kitchen table in the dark, and tried to understand how 3 years of lies had fitted themselves so neatly inside a marriage, a church, and a donor program without ever once tripping loudly enough to wake the man paying for them. At 5:10, Vanessa came downstairs in one of those pale silk robes she wore when she wanted to look both vulnerable and superior before sunrise. She saw me at the table and paused. Not long, just enough. You're up early. So are you. She crossed to the sink, poured water into the kettle, did not ask why I still had my suit pants on or why the violin case was no longer with me. That alone told me she had not noticed it was missing at the gala, or if she had, she was waiting for me to misplay first. You seemed thoughtful last night, she said. Arthur said you were still looking at the annex sketches when he left. I was. And I watched my own wife spoon loose tea into the silver pot Elise's mother had given us 30 years earlier, and felt, for the first time in my life, the pure animal strangeness of sharing a kitchen with someone whose voice had been sitting in fake letters beside my daughter's name for years. And I'm thinking, I said, that if I put my family name on another building, I want to understand exactly what I'm buying. That landed. Not badly, not openly, but it landed. Vanessa turned from the stove with the kettle in one hand. What do you mean by buying? You know what I mean. We've poured a lot of money into Prague. I've poured a lot of money into Prague. If the church wants me to underwrite another wing in Lily's honor, I'd like something more solid than thank you language and brochures. Her face stayed composed. Her eyes did not. Daniel, she said softly, this isn't a hardware invoice. No, it wasn't. That was the whole point. I let a little hurt show because hurt was believable and because guilty people often mistake wounded pride for the full extent of a man's suspicion. I know what it isn't, I said. That's exactly why I want to look harder before I write another 6 figures. That number was chosen for effect. It worked. Vanessa set the kettle down too carefully. Who's talking to you? I gave her the answer she deserved. My accountant. She relaxed half a degree. That told me more than I expected. Vanessa had no reason to fear my accountant unless there were books somewhere that did not survive clean inspection. She carried the tea back to the table and set a cup in front of me. I did not touch it. What are you asking for exactly? She said. Breakdown of mission expenditures, timeline, current site, who's supervising Lily now, how the annex ties into the conservatory program. Nothing dramatic. She sat across from me and folded one leg beneath her robe. If a painter had wanted the image of a patient second wife guiding a grieving widower toward faith, he could not have staged it better. Daniel, she said, there are moments when love becomes interrogation wearing better clothes. I looked at her. Really looked. If you had passed her in a grocery aisle and heard only the sentence, you would have thought it elegant. Maybe wise. Maybe sad. Inside the kitchen, where my daughter's life had been professionally dismantled and sold back to me through tender vocabulary, it sounded exactly like what it was. A warning in perfume. I pushed my untouched cup away. Then I guess we should both dress more plainly. Her face changed then, not fully. Not enough for court, enough for marriage. The sweetening left her eyes. You are tired, she said. And when you are tired, you get suspicious of the people carrying what you can't. You mean the people billing what I can't inspect. There it was. The room went still. For 2 seconds I thought she might slap me. Not because she was that kind of dramatic woman. Because there are moments when contempt moves faster than style. Instead, she stood. Fine, she said. I'll ask Nathan to prepare something cleaner for you. But for your daughter's sake, I would be very careful not to turn your guilt into sabotage. She is not strong enough to survive another man's need to feel in control. Then she took her tea and went back upstairs. That line stayed with me after she left. Another man's need. The arithmetic of that phrase was so ugly it almost impressed me. Turn the father into one more selfish man. Turn the daughter into the fragile zone. Turn questions into danger. Turn money into care. I sat in the dark kitchen until the kettle clicked itself silent and the first gray line of morning moved across the floorboards. Then I got up, showered, shaved, put on work clothes, and opened the store at 7:30 like the world had not split the night before. The first customer wanted furnace filters. The second wanted a copy of a key. The third argued over whether deck screws had gotten worse or he had gotten weaker. I answered everyone. I rang up change. I cut chain by the foot. I stood under fluorescent lights and sold useful things while my mind kept circling one phrase. Nonprofit fraud. Lily had been specific about that. Not gossip, not church drama. Fraud. By 10:15, I had the one name in town I trusted with that kind of ugliness. Gloria Benton. If you have never met a retired IRS field auditor who now spends her days pruning roses, correcting the grammar on city petitions, and treating church committees like a species of ornamental weed, then you have missed one of the last reliably useful categories of human being in America. Gloria is 73, narrow as a fence rail, always in hard shoes, silver haircut with no respect for vanity. She buys paint thinner from me every spring and furnace igniters every winter, and once described my tax filings as not dishonest, just romantic. I called her at home. She answered on the second ring. If this is about the church boiler fund, she said, I already told them the boiler is not missionary work. It's bigger. A pause. How much bigger? I think my wife and pastor invented a fake conservatory in Prague and used it to hide my daughter and move donor money. Another pause. Longer. Then Gloria said, perfectly calm, do not discuss that sentence over a phone line again. Meet me at noon at DeLuca's, back booth. Bring every paper you can touch without making them suspicious. That is what competence sounds like. Not emotion. Instructions. At noon, I carried a banker's box into the back booth at DeLuca's like a man bringing receipts to confess to a priest. Gloria had already ordered minestrone and coffee. She looked at the box, then at me. You look terrible. Thank you. You should. Sit down. I told her the story from Ben's death forward. Not elegantly, not linearly, but enough. The mission, the letters, the checks, the annex, the violin case, the attic, the room, the lock, the copies Lily had given me. Gloria listened without interrupting except once to ask, did you ever independently verify that Prague address? No. Good, nothing ruins a fraud case like a victim who accidentally did one competent thing too early. That was Gloria at her most supportive. She put on reading glasses and went through the papers one at a time. At the first donor memo, she grunted. At the second, she nodded once. At the brochure draft for the Hale Center, she actually laughed. Of course they want the warehouse, Mercer access, donor parking, and your name on the facade so no one asks what happened to the old scholarship funds. I stared at her. How do you know that fast? Because thieves are not creative, Daniel. They're iterative. They keep making the same move under better branding. She circled 3 lines with her pen. A shell entity called St. Bridget Arts Exchange, a property study line item routed through pastoral outreach, a mailing contract to a European administrative partner. This, she said, tapping the mailing line, is not a conservatory. It's an offshore respectability costume. Probably a mail service or contract desk. Maybe real enough to receive documents, not real enough to host your daughter. She flipped to a bank transfer summary and frowned harder. Who is Morningside Cultural Housing LLC? I have no idea. You do now. She pushed the page back toward me. That's where part of your money went. By 2 o'clock, Gloria had turned my grief into columns. What I loved about her in that moment was not kindness. She has some, buried under gravel. It was that she refused to let the story remain emotional fog. She kept translating pain into structure. 4 checks from me never went where the letters said they went. 2 donor gifts listed as scholarship support were routed first through St. Bridget Arts Exchange, then into Morningside. 3 reimbursements were authorized under Mission Housing, even though the signatures belonged to Vanessa, not Cole. A design retainer for the Hale Center had been paid before I had ever verbally agreed to the project. They're not just planning to take your warehouse, Gloria said. They have already started spending the story of having it. I sat back and rubbed both hands over my face. What do I do first? First, you do absolutely nothing dramatic. Second, I pull public filings on every entity here. Third, you get me copies of your checks, wire transfers, and any letter you ever received. Original envelopes, too, if you kept them. I did. Good. Sometimes hoarding is just early evidence preservation with worse branding. By late afternoon, she had more. The Prague partner address was a mail forwarding office over a luggage shop. St. Bridget Arts Exchange was a registered nonprofit with one room rented in Philadelphia and 0 actual employees. Morningside Cultural Housing LLC owned a narrow brick townhouse 12 miles outside the city, and another property line item appeared under renovation permits connected to the church. Vanessa sat on the advisory board of one entity and signed vendor approvals for another under her maiden name, which I had seen on exactly one piece of our marriage paperwork and nowhere else because she preferred a cleaner life story once rings entered the room. Gloria slid the printouts across the booth. Your wife is not supporting a mission, Daniel. She's running a laundering corridor with hymnals on the walls. I looked at the papers, then at her. What about the church board? She snorted. The board is probably what most boards are. One man too tired, 2 men too proud, 1 woman asking quiet questions nobody rewards, and 3 donors who think piety is an accounting category. Can we go to the police now? We can go to the police once we can show them people, accounts, and intent instead of a room and your understandable desire to set fire to a choir loft. She leaned forward. What we need is live corroboration. Your daughter. Better documents. And, if the Lord is still taking occasional requests, one good confession. I thought about Lily saying evidence first, stage first, story later. They'll move the records if they smell us, I said. Yes, which means you keep smelling like a wallet. I hated how right that sounded. At 5:30, I closed the store early and drove to a coffee place 2 towns over, so no one connected to the church would see me. I bought the blackest coffee they had in a plain paper cup and a blueberry muffin, because when Lily was 15 and furious at the world, she used to eat blueberry muffins in 3 exact pieces, as if rage still owed Graham something. Getting them back to the attic was the next problem. Ezra solved it for me without meaning to. He showed up at the store just before closing with his mother to buy poster board for a science project. He looked at me exactly once. Then, while his mother debated glue sticks, he walked down the fastener aisle and said to a row of pegboard hooks, "The janitor leaves the side cellar open on Wednesdays because of the boiler leak." Then he kept walking. That night I parked behind the church, went through the side cellar, climbed past pipes and cracked hymn storage, and reached the attic corridor without seeing anyone. When I tapped once on the outer door, Lily opened it before my hand was fully down. I handed her the coffee first. She took 1 sip, closed her eyes, and laughed under her breath. God, that's disgusting. You're welcome. The muffin made her stop, not because it was special, because it was remembered. She looked at the paper bag for a long second, then said, You still buy the same brand. Some traditions survive. She nodded and took a bite so carefully I knew ordinary taste had become unfamiliar in a way that made me want to break every cup in the church office just to hear something honest happen. I laid Gloria's printouts on the desk. Lily read them fast. Her shoulders changed as she moved down the pages. By the time she reached Morningside Cultural Housing LLC, her face had gone very still. That's the townhouse in Bryn Mawr, she said. I looked up sharply. You know it? I lived there 9 weeks, she swallowed once. They called it transition housing, 2 women, 1 basement room, no keys for us. A keyboard teacher on Tuesdays, so the brochure photos looked legitimate if anyone ever visited. Vanessa came twice, Cole never, Marcus once when I stopped writing. I sat down on the bed because my knees had started thinking for themselves. How many places? She counted silently. 3 that I know were for the same thing, maybe more. 1 farmhouse in Lancaster County, the townhouse, then here, maybe others for other women. I only ever heard names, never stayed long enough to see patterns clearly. That gave Gloria something even better than money. Scale. The thing was bigger than Lily. Predators get bolder once the first successful lie starts paying its own utilities. I need originals, Lily said. What originals? Ledger drives, dictation drafts, board minutes. Cole keeps the real donor files in the old choir library because no one under 40 knows the room exists and everyone over 40 thinks it's locked because of mold. Her mouth tightened. It isn't mold, it's evidence. I looked around the attic. How do we get them? Not all at once. She nodded toward the stairwell. Vanessa comes up after evening prayer on Thursdays to rehearse my wording for board dinners. If I can keep her talking, you might get 7 minutes in the library. I stared at my daughter. She stared back. No, Dad. No, I just found you. I'm not using you as bait inside the place that kept you. That place has been using me as bait for 3 years. The difference is I know where the hook is. I opened my mouth, closed it again, because the room itself kept reminding me she had already survived the part where I got to feel morally pure and protective. Now we were in the part where she knew the machinery better than I did. What happens if she catches me? Lily smiled without humor. Then you finally get to hear how quickly concern turns into threat when there's no audience. She was right, and it terrified me because she was right, like a person who had seen it happen too often to waste poetry on the explanation. We spent the next hour building small, practical things, a timetable, which stairwell stayed unwatched, which hallway camera was dead, which office floorboard clicked, what language Vanessa used when she was suspicious, how Marcus knocked, where Cole kept his ring of keys. By the time I left that night, revenge no longer looked like rage. It looked like a schedule, and schedules, unlike fury, can survive the first mistake. Thursday became the longest day of my life before Friday had even arrived. Gloria spent the morning turning public records into something uglier and cleaner. Morningside did not just own the Bryn Mawr townhouse. It had also leased 2 short-term houses used under women's renewal lodging. The board's signatures approving those leases matched the signature style on Lily's forged mission letters, only where Vanessa's hand had slipped from polished mimicry into impatience. St. Bridget Arts Exchange had paid for equipment that never appeared in tax disclosures. A separate consulting fee tied to Marcus's name appeared every quarter under Pastoral Stabilization Review. Pastoral stabilization, Gloria said over speakerphone, is not a recognized accounting need unless the church now amortizes guilt. The best part of working with Gloria was that she treated blasphemy and precision as equally holy when the paperwork deserved both. By noon, she had another piece. A draft resolution for the church board next week, authorization of the Hale Center for Sacred Strings, conditional on legacy donor fulfillment, family alignment, and testimonial close. Family alignment. Not consent, not contract. Alignment. That meant my daughter was not just being hidden. She was being positioned, brought out as needed, softened into a living ribbon to tie around the warehouse once the gift looked inevitable enough. I went back to the church before 6, carrying a flat canvas tool bag. Inside were a flashlight, a small pry bar, gloves, a screwdriver set, 2 empty manila envelopes, and the most absurdly useful thing I own, a compact inspection mirror I sell to men who believe engine work should not require flexibility if mirrors exist. It was not burglary equipment. It was hardware. That distinction mattered morally to absolutely no one, but I clung to it anyway. Ezra did not appear. I was glad. Children should not have to keep carrying the truth after they have already delivered it. I went in through the side cellar, climbed the boiler stairs, and waited in the blind corner near the choir corridor while the evening prayer meeting hummed below like a patient animal. At 7:12 exactly, I heard Vanessa's heels on wood. Lily had told me she would come with tea, not coffee, when she wanted submission, and with paper when she wanted performance. That night I heard both. A tray, a folder, the outer attic door opening. Then Vanessa's voice, soft, measured, the expensive version. "You've been restless this week." No answer. Then Lily faint through the wall. "Have I?" "You know you have. Ezra says your scales have been sharper. That usually means your mind is chewing on itself again." I wanted to step through the wall and break something. Instead, I counted backwards from 20, then moved. The choir library sat off the old north gallery behind a narrow door disguised as paneling. Lily had been right. No mold, no warning placard, just a cheap deadbolt in a hallway nobody modern donors ever walked. Cole's keyring was still beyond my reach, so I used the inspection mirror to check the bolt type, then the pry bar to coax the frame just enough for the strike plate to loosen without snapping. 30 years in hardware teaches you that most locked things are only as secure as the laziness of the man who installed them. Inside, the room smelled like dust, paper, and old felt. Shelves to the ceiling, choir robes and garment bags, music folios, bound program books. 3 metal file cabinets, 1 desk, 1 wall of banker's boxes labeled in neat black marker. I kept my flashlight low and moved fast. The first cabinet held old hymn arrangements. The second held donor correspondence. The third was locked with a smaller cylinder, which took me longer than I liked to persuade open, but not longer than a man's patience can survive if his daughter has spent 3 years under the roof above him. Inside were flash drives, check copies, deposit slips, board minutes, and 2 folders that made the whole case step out of suspicion and into malice. One was labeled Restoration Voices, the other, Transition Management. I took both. Then I opened them because sometimes evidence is too hot not to see immediately. Restoration Voices contained dictated letter structures, not just Lily's, at least 6 names, women I did not know. Categories: grief, pregnancy, nervous exhaustion, family conflict, public discretion cases. Under each name was a tone guide: more yielding, less sarcasm, increase faith language, reduce direct references to home, use gratitude after every second paragraph. If father presses for call, invoke fragility, not punishment. If donor support weakens, emphasize progress, but not readiness. My hands went cold. This was not a lie built around 1 daughter and 1 church. It was a system. Transition management was worse because it had the confidence of repetition. Medication tolerance notes, housing rotation, behavior triggers, family leverage, visibility risk, readiness for testimonial use, escalation paths if subjects become resistant or useful again. That phrase belonged to Lily's life now. Someone else's pen had put it there. I copied what I could into the envelopes, flash drives, minutes, the 2 folders, a board packet about the Hale Center. A property appraisal with my warehouse highlighted in red, A consulting contract with Marcus under the heading Special Recovery Architecture. A donor pledge projection showing my expected contribution before I had ever made it. Then I heard Vanessa laugh. Not the public laugh. The one she used when she forgot to be decent, because the listener was already trapped. Through the corridor wall, her voice carried more clearly now. Daniel only gets stubborn when he thinks he is protecting someone. If I give him just enough injury, he will overcorrect with money. He always does. Lily did not answer, or if she did, I could not hear it. Vanessa kept going. That is the mercy of men like your father. They want to believe cost proves love. I stood in the choir library with folders under my arm and understood something that made me briefly need the desk for balance. Vanessa did not just use my guilt. She respected it, studied it, cataloged it. It was one of the levers in the building. Then Lily spoke, voice flatter than the room deserved. What if he asks to hear from me before he signs anything? He won't, Vanessa said. And if he does, you will give him the version that calms him. You still know how. There was a pause. Then Lily said, almost lazily, maybe I'm tired of calming him. Vanessa's answer came too fast. Do not confuse boredom with courage. That line told me two things at once. Vanessa suspected movement. Vanessa had not yet located it. I eased the choir library door shut, reset the frame as best I could, and slipped back to the blind corner before her heels returned to the stairs. She passed within 10 feet of me, folder under one arm, tray in both hands, the soft face back on. She smelled like bergamot and calculation. I waited until the stairwell swallowed the sound of her heels. Then I went back up. Lily opened the outer room before I knocked. One look at my face and she knew. You heard enough? Yes. How bad? Industrial. That got the smallest twitch from her. Maybe not humor. Recognition. I showed her the folders. For a second, she just stared. Then she took restoration voices from my hand like a person receiving proof that her nightmares had better filing systems than she did. There were others, she said quietly. Yes. She opened to one page and pointed. Rachel Devlin. I met her at the Lancaster house for 4 days. They told her family believed she needed privacy after a pregnancy scandal. She kept asking for her sister. Then one morning she was gone, and Vanessa said she had chosen silence somewhere more suitable. She turned another page. June Mercer. They used her for donor dinners. Her husband thought she was in Arizona with cousins. I sat down slowly on the outer room table because the attic suddenly felt full of more ghosts than the church had any right to hold. Can we still do this next week? I asked. We have to. They're rushing. Lily tapped the Hale Center packet. This means they've already sold the story to the board. If the vote happens before we move, they'll bury the whole scheme under expansion language and make it look like the records were just messy outreach administration. I have enough to go to the police now. You have enough for them to start. Not enough to stop Cole from saying the whole thing was consensual private recovery with bad bookkeeping. She was right. Again, there is nothing quite like hearing your child reason clearly inside the architecture of her own abuse. Pride and horror arrive together, and neither one cancels the other. So what gets us enough? I asked. She thought for a moment, then said, them, in their own voices, talking like they still control the ending. That was the same thing Gloria had said. One good confession. Lily reached under the desk and pulled out a folded music folio. Inside were 3 more sheets and a tiny digital recorder no bigger than a matchbox. My eyebrows went up. She shrugged. Maintenance left it in the old AV drawer 6 months ago. I kept it. Have you used it? Twice. She met my eyes. Not well. My hands shake when Vanessa gets too close. I nodded once. Mine too. We built the next plan together. Vanessa believed I was circling the matching gift and needed reassurance. Cole believed my name on the warehouse would close the donor gap if he stroked the right part of my legacy. Both of them still thought Lily could be made to produce whatever performance was required if the incentives were shaped carefully enough. So I would give them what greedy people mistake for safety, a bigger number. The next morning I met Pastor Cole in his office. He keeps that office like a man staging his own obituary. Dark shelves, good lamplight, minimal clutter, a cross large enough to feel expensive, books arranged not by use but by what their spines suggest about him. He stood when I came in and gave me the grave, understanding smile, pastor's practice in mirrors. Daniel, Vanessa said you were unsettled. That's one word. He gestured me into the chair across from his desk. I would rather hear your unrest than your politeness. That line might have worked on me once. I set a legal pad on my knee and let irritation show. Not suspicion, not knowledge, irritation. I'm tired of paying for fog, Nathan. He did not flinch. Meaning? Meaning I have put over $200,000 into a European restoration program and I still know less about my daughter's actual daily life than I know about the city's road salt budget. He folded his hands. Pain rarely supplies itemized receipts. No, I said. Fraud does. There it was. Just enough. His face changed. Not much. Cole's kind of man trained his features too well for panic, but a small alertness entered him, the way a banker's hand shifts when the word audit lands. Be careful, Daniel. Then help me be careful. I want clarity. I let the silence stretch a beat longer. And I want something before I sign a single annex document. That word did it. Sign. He leaned forward slightly. What something? I want to hear Lily. Live. Not a letter. Not a summary. Her. He sat back. For a full second, I wondered if I had pushed too fast. Then he smiled. Sadder this time. Deeper. The voice dropped half a register. Your daughter's stability is not a demonstration unit. No, I said, but the Hale name isn't either. That landed harder. Men like Nathan Cole know exactly when legacy enters a room, because legacy is just vanity with better tailoring and larger checks. I kept going. I'm considering the warehouse. That is not a small thing. If I do it, I want to hear with my own ears that the mission you sold me has not become some elegant way of managing my absence for profit. Again, not accusation exactly, just enough blood in the water. Cole looked down at his desk as if considering the holiness of patience. When he looked back up, his eyes had gone colder, even though his voice had not. You are wounded, Daniel. Wounded men often confuse transparency with control. There it is, I said. That sentence, you all say versions of it every time I get close to a simple question. He was quiet for a moment, then said, All right, not live. That would destabilize her, but I can arrange a private testimony before the board dinner Monday. You hear her, you see her. Then we speak about the annex like men protecting a future instead of poking at a wound. A private testimony. There was my opening. I nodded slowly as if he had given something precious away. Then I said the line Gloria told me to use if I wanted greed to overpower caution. If what I hear Monday gives me peace, I'll stop circling and start committing. The warehouse, cash, and the first renovation tranche before quarter end. Pastor Nathan Cole did not smile. That would have been too naked. But satisfaction moved behind his eyes like a light turning on in another room. That would honor Lily beautifully, he said. I stood. No, it would honor truth beautifully, if there is any. Then I left before he could dress the conversation in one more sermon and make me feel dirtier than he deserved. Outside in my truck, I sat for 30 seconds with both hands on the steering wheel and the recorder in my pocket warm from my body. Yes, I had worn one. Gloria's idea. Hardware store surveillance sample from an inventory dispute last year. Not elegant, not perfect, but enough. Cole had not confessed the attic, not the shell entities, not Lily, but he had offered a private appearance. He had linked my warehouse and money to seeing her, and he had defaulted, as always, to the language of management. Sometimes revenge begins not when the villain admits enough for prison. Sometimes it begins when he says just enough to prove he still thinks your daughter belongs in the category of negotiable assets. That evening I went back to the attic and played the audio for Lily. She stood by the desk, arms folded tight, listening to Cole promise that seeing her could be arranged if enough money moved afterward. When it ended, she said only one thing. He always sounds gentler when he's selling access to somebody already trapped. I looked at her. You all right? No, she said, but I'm clearer. That was better than all right in the kind of war we were fighting. We spent the rest of the night preparing for Monday, and once again, revenge became a schedule. Monday came dressed like a business meeting and felt like a hanging. That morning, Gloria met me in the back office of the store with 2 binders, one small recorder, one legal pad, and the kind of expression people wear when they know exactly how ugly the next 48 hours might get if timing slips by even a breath. I've got enough to interest the Attorney General's charitable fraud unit, she said. Not enough yet to make the church impossible to defend as a weird private ministry with bad controls. Your daughter's testimony changes that. Their own words change it faster. She slid the binders toward me. The first was the money. My checks, wire dates, the Prague shell, Morningside, property studies, renovation permits, vendor overlap, Vanessa's maiden name linked to entity filings, Marcus's consulting contracts, a little river of money flowing through holy language into very secular walls. The second was the pattern, the letters, the tone guides, the transition notes, the women's names, the board packet for the Hale Center, public brochures against real expenditures, a clean comparison chart showing what donors were promised versus what actually existed. Gloria tapped the second binder. Fraud likes clutter, jurors like columns, never forget that. What about the women on the list? I found 2. Rachel Devlin is alive in Ohio and has no idea she appears in your church's donor narrative as a success case. June Mercer died 18 months ago, but not in Arizona with cousins. She died in a care facility outside Reading after a family petition for guardianship. Gloria's jaw hardened. That one smells like its own hell. We stay in our lane for now, but I already made a call. I sat very still. The story had already widened beyond Lily in the attic. That should have strengthened me. Instead, it made the whole thing feel even more obscene. My daughter was not just someone they had hidden. She was one file in a filing system built for profitable disappearance. At noon, I met Assistant Attorney General Priya Shah in a county office building that looked too tired for the amount of damage discussed inside it. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, dark suit, no jewelry beyond a watch. The kind of woman who gave the impression of having skipped past patience early because people with prepared lies always waste so much of it. She did not ask for my feelings first. She asked for dates, names, entities, what was original and what was copied, which pieces came from Lily directly, which statements I could personally testify to, which recordings were legal in our state if obtained by a participant, which people inside the church still believed the public story, which people might try to move documents if the board smelled scandal. That alone made me trust her more than half the sympathetic people I had known in my life. When I described the attic, the lock, and the private testimony Cole had offered Monday night in exchange for moving the annex deal forward, she wrote something down and said, "Predators often confuse privately managed access with benevolence. That confusion helps us." "What happens if we move tonight?" I asked. "What happens," she said, "is they deny the coercion, portray your daughter as a consenting adult under spiritual care, call the financial trails misunderstanding, and argue your grief and marriage troubles made you project abuse onto an unconventional church program." She looked up from the pad. "What happens if we move after they talk themselves past the line is different." I had already known that, but hearing it stated with legal bones made it easier to carry. "So we wait." "For tonight," she said, "and then maybe not very long." I met Lily in the attic just after 4. She had washed her hair, worn a dark blue dress instead of the gray skirt. There was defiance in that decision, I realized. Not enough to alarm Vanessa at a glance, enough for Lily to feel like herself under the fabric. "Blue," I said. "Not church blue, my blue." She tugged once at the sleeve. "It was in a donation box. I stole it spiritually." That was the first joke she had made in my presence that was not mostly armor. I held up a paper bag. "What did I bring?" "If the answer is tea, I'm leaving without you." "Cheeseburger." She took the bag from me and for 1 second looked so much like the girl who used to eat in the lumber aisle after high school orchestra practice that I had to turn away and pretend I was checking the window latch. "You remembered," she said quietly. "I forgot a lot. I didn't forget that." We sat on the floor and built the night. Cole had told me the private testimony would happen at 7 in the small chapel off the board corridor. Not the main sanctuary, not the attic, smaller room, controlled lighting, good chairs, no witnesses except him, Vanessa, me, and supposedly a fragile daughter brought in just long enough to reopen my wallet. That room helped us. Small chapel meant microphones could be planted, no public movement, few entrances, and, if Shah was right, the very intimacy of it would make them speak the way predators do when they believe vulnerability is already owned. Lily would enter under Vanessa's hand. Sit. Speak whatever she had to for the first minute. Then shift. Not recklessly. Carefully. Ask why Prague letters still had to be written if the Hale Center was now the priority. Ask whether the board needed to hear her European voice or her quiet one. Ask what happened to women who stopped being useful. Ask if the annex would finally let them move her somewhere nobody in the choir could stumble across by accident. Those questions sounded strange until you understood what they did. They gave Cole and Vanessa room to correct, explain, justify, and reveal. Management wears its throat out when it believes it is clarifying something to the already controlled. I tucked the small recorder into the lining of Lily's dress with hands I hoped looked steadier than they felt. She watched me do it. "Do you know what the weirdest part is?" she asked. "What?" "I'm not afraid of them realizing I'm wired. I'm afraid of them saying the same things they always say, and part of me still believing the old version first." I stopped. That was the thing no courtroom ever really counts. Not just what was done to someone, what kept living afterward inside the person it was done to. I put my hands lightly on her shoulders, then listened for me, not for them. She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means if one of them starts speaking and you feel yourself shrink, ask what I would hear in that sentence if I loved you without wanting anything back." Her face changed, not into comfort, into concentration. "That's a hard question." "Good," I said. "Easy questions are what got us here." At 6:45 I took my place in the small chapel. No stained glass, just dark wood chairs, side candles, framed mission photos, and one brass cross on the wall trying its best to civilize a room designed mostly for quiet pressure. Cole arrived first, Vanessa second. Both of them dressed in the carefully dim version of elegance rich churches like to use when they want gravity to smell like money. "You came," Cole said, as if he had not spent 3 years billing me for my own daughter's silence. I said I would. He nodded toward the envelope I carried. My warehouse appraisal. Blank annex letter. Nothing signed, enough to keep his pulse warm. Vanessa sat beside me, not touching. Close enough that anyone entering would read unity before detail. "We're doing something delicate for you tonight," she said softly. "Try not to wound it by needing too much." I turned to look at her. "Everything you people do comes pre-wounded." That startled her. Good. Then the side door opened and Lily came in. For a second the room dropped away. Not because she looked broken, because she looked visible. No gray skirt, no attics, no note under a stall, no doctrine voice. Just my daughter in blue, a little thinner, a little older, walking into a room full of people who still believed the right arrangement of tone could turn her into scenery. Vanessa took her by the elbow and guided her to the chair opposite me. Lily sat, folded her hands, lowered her eyes. If I had not seen her in the attic 2 days earlier, I might have believed she was still mostly theirs. Cole spoke first. "Daniel, thank you for accepting the boundaries this required." There it was, the language, boundaries, as if my fatherhood were an unruly weather front and his manipulation the disciplined shoreline. I kept my face still. Cole turned to Lily. "Would you like to tell your father what Prague taught you?" Lily lifted her eyes. Not to him, to me. And in a voice quiet enough to make Vanessa soften with satisfaction, she said, "It taught me that distance is easier to sell than truth." Cole smiled faintly. He thought she was still within the performance. "Go on." Lily looked down again. People give more when they cannot inspect what they are paying for. Vanessa's hand tightened on the chair arm. There, a pulse. Cole stepped in smoothly. "Meaning faith often funds what fear cannot." Lily nodded once. "As long as the fear stays useful." My whole body wanted to move. Instead, I let the silence sit. Let Cole feel the need to mend it. "Lily has had difficult seasons," he said to me. "She still sometimes translates care through old suspicion. That is what long grief does." Lily turned her head just enough toward him. "Is that what you call it now? Long grief?" Cole's smile cooled. "Naming isn't always the work, stabilization is." Vanessa entered then, too quickly. "It's all right, Lily. Your father only needs to hear that the work mattered." There it was. Need, only, hearing. The whole family compressed into donor management. Lily looked at her. "What exactly mattered?" No one answered immediately, so she went on. "The letters, the accents, the stories about Prague, the soft version of me you kept mailing to him?" She turned to me. "Did you like the Prague me, Dad? Was she easier to fund than the one upstairs?" Vanessa rose half an inch from her seat. "Lily," Cole lifted a hand, not to calm her, to claim the room again. "What your father funded," he said carefully, "was an environment in which you did not destroy yourself." Lily's head tilted. "Then why did the environment keep changing addresses?" There. If you want truth from liars, you do not swing first. You force them to choose between denial and explanation. Explanation is usually greedier. Cole answered faster than a wise man would have. "Because privacy requires flexibility." Lily did not let him settle on it. "And the women before me, did their privacy need flexibility too?" That hit both of them. Vanessa's face changed first. Real anger. "Not large, not loud, true." "This is what happens when curiosity gets mistaken for insight," she said. "You always did prefer ugliness if it let you feel smarter than the room." My daughter looked at her, and for the first time I saw not just the hurt child or the trained woman in the attic, but the old Lily, the one who used to dismantle bad logic in hardware aisle 4 with a roll of price stickers in one hand. "Vanessa," she said quietly, "I know about Rachel Devlin." Stillness. It moved through the room like smoke. Cole's voice dropped. "Where did you hear that name?" Lily's answer was almost lazy. "Same place I heard June Mercer. Same place I heard family alignment and testimonial close." Vanessa turned to Cole now, not to me. That mattered. When danger finally stopped pretending, I was no longer the axis. Cole looked at me, then at the envelope in my hand, then back at Lily. "Daniel," he said, "if this is your way of testing the moral integrity of a church through the unstable language of a wounded daughter, I strongly advise you to end it now." That line might have worked on the old me, the me who still believed his job was to save rooms from discomfort by swallowing his own. Instead, I said, "No, I think I'd like to hear you define unstable." Lily drew a breath, then asked the question we had agreed mattered most. "What was the plan after the annex?" Neither of them moved. She went on. "Was there ever going to be a Prague return? Or was I just going to become another testimony with no geography?" Vanessa snapped first, maybe because the room was too small for performance now, maybe because she could feel the edges closing and had never been built for true powerlessness. "The plan," she said, "was to stop your chaos from poisoning every room you entered." Cole cut in. "Vanessa," but Lily did not flinch. "My chaos." Yes, Vanessa stood fully now. "Your grief, your moods, your endless need to be the center of whatever pain was nearest. Ben died and somehow the whole town had to become your weather. Then you found files you did not understand and decided martyrdom would make you brave." I heard myself say, "Sit down, Vanessa." She ignored me. "No," she said to Lily. "Let's do truth since that is tonight's little hobby. You were impossible. Cole tried patience. Marcus tried structure. I tried kindness. Nothing held. Every room became about what you felt, what you feared, what you suspected. We gave you privacy because public life would have chewed you apart." Lily's voice stayed level. "Then why did Dad have to pay for it through Prague?" Vanessa laughed once, harsh sound, wrong on her. "Because if we called it what it was, he would have dragged you home the first month out of guilt and ruined everything." There, not prison. Not yet, but there, ruined everything. The true subject had finally entered the room. Not healing, not Lily, their structure. Cole stepped in with the tone of a man saving a messy witness. "What Vanessa means is that Daniel's love has always been reactive. Generous, yes, but reactive. We needed distance from his need. I leaned back in my chair and asked, distance from my need or access to my money without inspection? Cole looked directly at me now. The mask did not drop, it refined. Those are not opposites, he said. I will remember that line for the rest of my life. Not because it was clever, because it was the moment he forgot normal people still hear moral algebra when he speaks it out loud. Lily stared at him. And the Hale Center? Cole exhaled through his nose, tired now, as if explaining simple things to damaged people were the true burden in the room. The center was the logical culmination, a permanent space for sacred strings, women's restoration residencies, donor confidence, and your eventual reintegration through curated visibility. You think small because suffering narrows you. We were building future. My hands curled under the envelope. Curated visibility, there it was. Her life, his phrase. Vanessa sat down slowly. No softness left. You should be grateful, she said to Lily. Do you know how much uglier this could have been? Do you know how many fathers with your symptoms and your temper would have ended up in police reports or psychiatric holds? We made you survivable. Lily looked at her for a long second, then asked the cleanest question in the room. For who? Nobody spoke. Then Lily said, for me, for Dad, or for the annex donors? Cole answered without meaning to answer. For all three, until you made separation necessary. Necessary. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly, maybe realizing too late that words were spilling past the line greedily enough to feed a prosecutor for weeks. I glanced at the tiny red light buried in the fold of Lily's dress where only I knew to look. Still blinking. Cole saw my glance. Just a flicker. Nothing more. But some predator sense in him must have finally put the room together, because he stood too fast and said, Lily, stand up. I heard my daughter inhale sharply. Vanessa turned toward her. What is under that dress? There it was. The moment where management becomes fear and fear becomes hands. Vanessa moved first, toward Lily, toward the hem, toward the recorder. Lily stood up so hard the chair struck the floor behind her. And in a voice that split the room cleaner than any sermon ever had, she said, Do not touch me like I still belong to your plan. That was not our agreed line. That was better. I stepped between them. Cole went colder than I had ever seen a human face go while still remaining civilized to the untrained eye. What have you done? He asked me. Before I could answer, the chapel door opened. Assistant Attorney General Priya Shah walked in with 2 investigators and 1 uniformed officer behind them, calm as a tax notice. What he should have done years ago, she said, was ask for receipts. Everything after that moved fast. Cole turned first toward shock, then toward performance. Vanessa skipped shock and went straight to outrage. Lily did not collapse. That mattered more to me than anything else in the room. As the investigators secured the recorder and Priya began informing them of the warrants being prepared for the office wing, donor archives, and residential properties linked to the church entities, Pastor Nathan Cole looked at me with the peculiar disgust certain men reserve for victims who refuse to stay administratively useful. This will destroy the church, he said. No, I answered. What you did inside it will. He still thought that was the worst thing waiting for him. It wasn't, because the real revenge had not even begun yet. If you have never watched a church lawyer arrive before midnight in loafers and a look of managerial sorrow, count yourself lucky. By 1 a.m, the office wing was being photographed, hard drives boxed, donor records seized, and every hallway in the building felt like a courtroom trying to disguise itself as carpet. Nathan Cole had retained counsel within an hour. Vanessa had shifted from outrage to controlled victimhood in less time than it took the investigator to tag the chapel recorder, and still, nobody was in handcuffs. That is the part people misunderstand about justice when they have only seen it on screens. Truth can enter a room fast. Procedure walks in afterward carrying labeled bags and careful verbs. Priya Shah was honest about that from the start. In 48 hours, she told me in the church parking lot, while evidence boxes moved behind us, they will tell the board this is a grief-fractured family dispute amplified by accounting sloppiness. They will say your daughter consented to a private spiritual retreat. They will say the nonprofit trails are complicated but not sinister. They will say the recordings were taken in a moment of emotional escalation. She looked toward Cole's lawyer conferring under the portico. Conviction is one timeline. Stopping the church from reorganizing the lie by Friday is another. Friday. The Jubilee of Mercy Gala. The real one. The big one. The one donors actually cared about. The one where the Hale Center was supposed to be announced under my family name with enough light and applause to harden fiction into community memory before facts could intervene. They're still going ahead? I asked. Of course they are, Priya said. Public institutions under threat almost always choose ceremony first and humility last. That line alone made me want to vote for her for anything. By the time I got Lily into my truck, it was 2 a.m. She sat beside me wrapped in a state-issued blanket while the church she had been hidden in glowed behind us like a wedding venue that had accidentally wandered into a crime scene. Am I coming home with you? She asked. The question hurt because of how careful it sounded. Yes, I said. She nodded once and looked straight ahead. No tears, no collapse, just a nod. I realized then that after years of conditional access, even permission to come home arrived sounding like a fragile administrative outcome. When we pulled into my driveway, she stayed in the truck for a full minute staring at the porch light. "What is it?" I asked. I forgot the house would still smell the same. That nearly put me through the windshield. Inside, everything was ordinary, in ways I had once considered boring and now wanted to kneel before. Wood polish, old radiator heat, the faint metal and cedar smell that drifts home with me from the store no matter how much Vanessa used to complain about it. The clock above the stove running 3 minutes fast because I never fixed it and Elise had liked it that way. Lily stood in the kitchen like a museum visitor meeting the version of her own life that should have kept happening. Then she touched the edge of the counter and said, "She still put the sugar jar there." She meant Elise, her mother, not Vanessa. "Yes," I said. "I never moved it." That was the first time she cried hard enough. I had to look away and pretend the kettle required expertise. The next 2 days broke into 2 separate worlds. In one world, Priya's team moved through documents, warrants, interviews, bank trails, vendor records, and recovered devices with the cold discipline of people who already understood that horror becomes winnable only when it turns into folders. In the other world, my daughter had to relearn stupid, ordinary things. How to choose when to shower instead of waiting for a schedule. How to leave a room without explaining where she was going. How to drink coffee because she wanted it and not because someone handed it to her as a reward. How to open a window and trust that open meant open. The first morning she woke up in my house, she came downstairs at 6:20 in one of my old flannel shirts and stood by the back door staring at the yard. "What are you doing?" I asked, checking if it's really unlocked. I set my coffee down. "Want me to open it?" She thought about that for a second, then nodded. I unlocked it and stepped back. She opened the door herself. Cold air came in, wet grass smell, one crow somewhere on Mercer. Nothing sacred, nothing staged, just Pennsylvania deciding to keep being Pennsylvania in front of whatever else had happened. Lily stood in the doorway for nearly a minute, then said, with this strange, careful wonder, "I forgot morning could enter without permission." That sentence stayed with me all day. At the store, Gloria had taken over my office like occupation was one of her retirement hobbies. Folders everywhere, sticky notes, a sandwich she had no intention of finishing. Arthur Penn's board memos printed and annotated in a furious red pen. "He knew more than he will admit," she said without looking up as I walked in. "Arthur?" He signed off on consultant disbursements routed through Morningside after site visits he claims never happened. Either he is criminal or he is decorative. Possibly both. Which one helps us more? Decorative men always help eventually. They hate prison and embarrassment in exactly the right ratio. By noon, Priya called. They had searched the Bryn Mawr townhouse, 3 furnished bedrooms, 1 basement practice room, files, medication logs. A locked cabinet with signed but undated testimonial statements from 3 women, including one from Lily, that had been obviously assembled from dictated phrases and copied signature fragments. They had also searched Marcus's consulting office and found billing guides for containment cases. That phrase alone made Shaw go quiet for a beat, before repeating it back to me in the tone prosecutors use when disgust and opportunity happen to overlap. Containment cases, not patients, not parishioners, not women in grief. Cases. They also found a marketing deck for the Hale Center, projected donor yield, restoration narratives, a slide called Leverage Optics listing my warehouse, Lily's European Witness, and Family Redemption Arc as mutually reinforcing assets if unveiled together at Jubilee. I sat in my office chair and listened to Priya read that line as if she were telling me the weather. Sometimes you have to admire the cruelty of ambition. They had not just wanted my property, they wanted my daughter displayed beside it so the theft looked like healing. "Can we stop Friday?" I asked. "We can raid it," Priya said. "We can shut it down." A pause. "But there is another option if you have the stomach for it." I already knew, or thought I did. "You mean let them build the stage and take it away in public?" "Yes," I closed my eyes, "because there are forms of justice meant for convictions and forms of justice meant for towns. They are not always the same thing. If Priya raided the Jubilee before the first donor arrived, Cole would tell his people exactly what she predicted. A grief-maddened daughter, a complicated retreat ministry, government hostility toward faith, the usual script. Half the church would cling harder, the other half would wait for permission to doubt. If we let the event begin and took it apart with Lily visible, documents ready, recordings queued, and donors watching in real time, the lie would lose something it could never recover: its elegance. When I got home that night, Lily was sitting at the kitchen table with my old cash ledger open, not because she needed it, but because she said the columns were soothing. Numbers had edges. Numbers did not use the word surrender unless a battle was actually happening. That Thursday night before the Jubilee became a second investigation layered on top of the first. The state had enough to search. I had enough to hate. Lily had enough to finally choose precision over panic. Those are three different forms of readiness, and I learned that week not to confuse them. Priya sent over copies of the preliminary extraction summaries from the seized office machines just after 11. I expected bank trails and donor lists. Those were there. What I did not expect were folders labeled with names that sounded almost pastoral until you opened them. Mercy retention, narrative continuity, attachment risk, property alignment. Lily sat beside me at the kitchen table while I read the summaries, and every time a new phrase landed, I felt her go a little stiller. Not because it shocked her, because it confirmed that what had happened to her was repeatable enough to have category names. One file contained draft response language for board members if the Hale daughter's return narrative becomes locally complicated. Another contained a color-coded map of the sanctuary identifying camera blind spots, donor seating hierarchy, which ushers could be trusted to redirect family disruption, and which choir children photographed well enough to keep on the live stream when contributions were requested. There was a subfolder for me, not Daniel Hale, DH. That alone felt obscene somehow. Men become initials in systems like that when the people designing them need distance from the humanity they are pricing. Inside DH sat scanned copies of my checks, notes on which anniversaries made me softer, suggestions for approaching me near my first wife's birthday, and one line from Vanessa that Priya read out loud so flatly I nearly broke the mug in my hand. He responds best when guilt is framed as unfinished fatherhood rather than obvious financial pressure. Lily did not speak for nearly a minute after that. Then she said, "I want her to have to hear that sentence in the same room as me." I said yes before considering whether I had any right to want the same thing. That is one of the weird moral knots in revenge. Sometimes justice and appetite finally point in the same direction, and you no longer trust yourself enough to tell where one ends and the other begins. Priya solved that for me by sounding like a filing cabinet. "If we do Friday publicly," she said over speakerphone, "we do it because public concealment was part of the instrument, not because humiliation is emotionally satisfying." Then, after a small pause, she added, "It can still be emotionally satisfying. That just cannot be the written reason." Lily laughed for the first time that day. A dry little sound, but real. I loved Priya for that too. Around midnight, Gloria arrived with sandwiches, a portable scanner, and the exact same moral energy she brings to inventory theft disputes. Meaning once something is wrong enough, her compassion expresses itself as administrative warfare. She spread paperwork across my kitchen like she was laying tile. Donor pledge forms from prior years, shipping receipts, the annex renderings, the old church capital campaign packet from before Vanessa ever married me. That last one mattered. There on page 14 sat a crude site sketch showing the church, the side lot, and my warehouse circled in blue ink with the note "Future Music Wing if Hale line neutralized." No date, no author. But the packet itself was 6 months older than my wedding. Lily and I looked at each other across the table and understood at the same time. Vanessa had not merely stepped into an existing plan after marrying me. The plan had been considering my property before she ever wore a ring from my house. Everything after that was sequencing. Gloria said, "You need to decide whether you want Truth Friday or Victory." I frowned. Those are not the same thing? Not always. Truth is everything. Victory is only what the room can absorb before it shuts its ears. That turned out to be one of the most useful sentences of the entire case. Because by 1 a.m, we had enough evidence to bury them morally 6 different ways, and enough common sense to understand that drowning a room in 6 forms of evil at once often lets the guilty float free on overload. So we stripped the Friday plan down. No attic architecture lecture first, no complete shell chain exposition first, no women's pattern first. First came the simplest lie, Prague, then the human fact, Lily here, then the money, then the words in their own mouths, then the documents. You build a public collapse the same way decent carpenters frame stairs, one clean rise at a time, or people fall backward before they reach the landing. Ezra became part of the preparation more than any of us intended. Priya's child specialist had already spoken to him once because he was the original disclosure point. But on Thursday afternoon, his mother requested a second meeting at the county office because the boy would not sleep unless someone told him whether Lily was going to be hidden again Friday. I went with Lily and Gloria, partly because it felt right, and partly because I wanted to look the kid in the eye and understand what kind of courage had slid a violin case under a bathroom stall while an entire institution congratulated itself outside. He was smaller up close than memory allowed. Small children often are when their choices were larger than the adults around them deserve. He sat with his knees pulled under the chair and answered the specialist in the plain, exhausted language of a child forced into accuracy early. Yes, Mrs. Hale made them use Sister Miriam sometimes. Yes, the bell meant stop. Yes, Lily had taught him how to loosen his shoulders before solos because tight shoulders make frightened notes sharp. And yes, he knew Prague was fake because once while carrying robes he heard Vanessa tell a donor on the phone that Europe tests better than hiding. Tests better. The room went silent after that. Not because it was surprising anymore, because hearing marketing vocabulary exit a child's mouth makes evil look exactly as old as it is. After the interview, Ezra asked Lily, "If you go into the church tomorrow, how will we know they can't keep you?" Lily crouched to his level and said, "Because tomorrow I'm not going in as a secret. I'm going in as evidence." He considered that with serious choirboy gravity and then nodded like the answer had passed inspection. That night, Lily asked me to help her choose what to wear. That sentence sounds small until you understand who was speaking it. For 3 years, other people had used clothes on her as categories: donor tenderness, musician purity, restoration modesty, fragile witness. Now she stood in my bedroom doorway, looking at 3 dresses Ruth had found, and asked, "What looks most like me and least like a performance of surviving me?" I told her black, because black had never tried to explain itself in our family. Elise wore it to piano competitions and tax appointments with equal conviction. Lily held the dress against herself, nodded once, and said, "Good. I want Vanessa to know immediately she's not styling this scene anymore." Then she paused and added, "Can I ask you something ugly?" I told her yes. She asked whether it made me sick to imagine her walking into that sanctuary with people staring at her like a ghost turned up late for her own funeral. I said yes. Then I added the truer second answer. What makes me sicker is how many of them will pretend surprise until the screen changes. She smiled without happiness and answered, "Then let them have to pretend hard." Around 2 in the morning, the house finally went quiet enough for fear to speak plainly. I found Lily standing in the front room by Elise's old piano with the lid closed and both hands flat on the wood. No violin, no donor case, just stillness. "What is it?" I asked. She did not turn. "I'm trying to decide whether tomorrow is the day I get my life back or the day I lose the version of it I used to fantasize about while I was in there." I understood immediately. Because captivity does not just steal the years it occupies, it also grows counterfeit futures inside the person surviving it. In some of Lily's imagined returns, perhaps I burst in sooner. Perhaps Ben never died. Perhaps Vanessa was only cold, not predatory. Perhaps Prague had actually existed and healing had cost less humiliation. Public truth kills all alternate endings at once. I walked over and stood beside her. "What version do you lose tomorrow?" She answered so quietly I almost missed it. "The one where everybody decent was just mistaken." That one sat between us. Then I told her the hardest, honest thing I had. "Maybe, but you also lose the version where their decency gets to keep charging interest." She looked at me then, really looked, and after a long second nodded. "Okay," she said, "then let's make it expensive." The morning of the Jubilee passed with the kind of false ordinary that always makes me think of storm gutters still holding leaves before hard rain finally tears them free. I opened the store because habit can steady the hands better than prayer some days. Lily sat in the office balancing old receipts because columns kept her breathing regular. Gloria fielded calls from 3 donors already nervous about the family rumor and managed to sound vague enough that they stayed curious and arrogant enough to attend anyway. By noon, Priya had plainclothes investigators positioned. By 1, Aaron had tested the sanctuary projection override twice. By 2, a county judge had signed the next wave of warrants so fast, I sent a thank you note to a public servant in my head and nearly choked on the novelty. By 3, Vanessa had left me 2 voicemails pretending concern and 1 text saying, "Daniel, please do not let today become something your daughter regrets in a public setting." That was how she always phrased it. As if Lily's public suffering were the only publicity ever worth fearing. At 4:30, Lily ate half a sandwich in my kitchen and said, "What if I freeze?" I answered, "Then freeze. They're the ones who need words." At 4:32, she asked, "What if seeing her makes me 12 again?" I answered, "Then you still won't be alone in the room." At 4:34, she asked, "What if I hate how much part of me still wants her to apologize and mean it?" That one took longer. Then I said, "That part of you is not weakness. It's proof they had to spend 3 years beating normal daughter instincts into management because those instincts were never on their side to begin with." She looked down at the table and breathed out slowly. "Okay," she said again. That word did a lot of work in my house that week. Not because any of us were okay, because okay was sometimes the strongest shape truth could fit into while moving. I told her what Priya proposed. She listened without interrupting, then asked, "Would I have to speak?" "Only if you choose." "Would they see me before we blow it open?" "Yes." She nodded once. Then she said, "Good." That was not the answer I had expected. "Good?" "Yes." Her eyes stayed on the ledger. "I want Vanessa to look at me and still think she owns the ending. I want Nathan to build the room in his head one last time. If the whole thing collapses before they get that moment, part of them will still believe they were unlucky instead of wrong." I stared at my daughter for a long time after that. Then I asked, "Did they teach you that too?" She shook her head slowly. "No, you did." "Me?" "You and Mom, at the store. When a customer lied, you always said the mistake wasn't enough. Let them commit to it. Let them walk all the way into the bad story first. That's how you get the truth clean. I had forgotten ever saying that. She hadn't. Parenting is a strange thing. Sometimes your child carries your best sentence through years. You were not there to help her use it. So we planned Friday. The church would keep the Jubilee. Arthur Penn had already emailed donors assuring them Monday's family disruption had been resolved and that no scheduled announcements would change. Vanessa, through counsel, had denied every allegation and painted Lily as an adult woman in a consensual faith-based recovery program whose father had destabilized her during a private spiritual session. Cole had released a statement about compassion, privacy, and the danger of secular misunderstanding. Half the town repeated it. The other half whispered questions but still intended to attend the gala because in Mercer County, gossip rarely interrupts the buffet. Priya had enough for a rest soon. What she needed for Friday was consent and timing. Lily would arrive with me, not hidden, not announced, plain black dress, hair down, violin case in hand. That last detail mattered, not because the instrument was sentimental, because the violin case had become proof before anyone understood it was proof. The same object donors had seen her carry as a teenager through youth concerts would now walk into the Jubilee they had funded under a fake foreign mission. Gloria and 2 investigators would sit among the donors. Aaron Bell, a tech contractor Shaw trusted, would override the sanctuary projection when signaled. The church's own live stream would remain on. Because nothing destroys careful reputation faster than helping broadcast your own collapse to the people who thought they were tuning in for generosity. My role was the simplest and hardest. I would be the donor they still thought they knew. I would stand when called. I would speak as if the gift remained possible. And I would wait until Pastor Nathan Cole invited the room to applaud a lie using my daughter's name. Then I would open the door he had built for himself and let the whole town watch him walk through it. The night before the Jubilee, Lily asked to see the attic one last time. My answer was no before I even thought. She accepted that too easily, which only made me feel guiltier. I don't want to go in, she said. I just want to stand outside the north stair and look at it while I'm allowed to leave. So I drove her there at 10. The church was dark except for the red exit signs and the old security light by the side lot. We stood near the boiler door while the building made its usual settling noises and nothing about it looked holy. That stairwell taught me something ugly, she said. What? That captivity does not always need chains. Sometimes it just needs everyone below the attic agreeing not to ask the right question. I looked up at the dark roofline. What was the right question? She smiled without warmth. Where is she really? We stood there a little longer. Then Lily turned, walked back to the truck, and never once looked behind her the second time. That was when I knew Friday was not just about exposing Vanessa and Cole. It was about taking the building's memory away from them too. The next morning she came into the kitchen carrying the violin case and asked, "Do you want me to play?" I almost said no, not because I did not want to hear her, because I wanted no sound in the house that might crack me open too early. Then I said yes. She opened the case at my kitchen table, tightened the bow with hands that shook only once, and played the first piece Elise ever taught her all the way through without stopping. I stood at the sink and looked out at nothing because some things are too private to survive direct eye contact even when they happen in your own home. When she finished, she said, "I'm not playing for them tonight. I know, I'm playing because they don't get to keep music either." That, more than the warrants or the binders or the shell entities, was when revenge finally felt clean. Not because someone was about to suffer, because something stolen was about to come home in public and refuse to sound like ownership ever again. The Jubilee of Mercy Gala always began with too much candlelight for a room with sprinkler heads in the ceiling. That was Pastor Nathan Cole's style. He liked charity to look medieval and expensive at the same time. Soft amber glow, string quartet if donors were important, choir children in cream and navy, mission banners hanging from the rafters with photographs of smiling women nobody in Mercer County had ever met and no one bothered to verify, because smiling women under scriptures are considered self-authenticating in some circles. I arrived at 6:40 with Lily on my arm and the violin case in her hand. The parking lot attendant saw us first. He blinked once, then twice, then looked toward the sanctuary doors, as if maybe the building itself had made a clerical error. Inside, the entire entry hall changed temperature. People stared, then stopped themselves, then stared again. Some recognized Lily instantly. Some recognized the outline of her and then refused to believe their own eyes, because believing them would have meant the last 3 years needed a full rewrite, and Mercer liked its truths incremental. A donor couple from the bank froze beside the coat check. One of the choir mothers actually crossed herself. Arthur Penn, standing near the registration table in a tuxedo that made him look like a man playing rich in a regional play, turned and nearly dropped his wine. Lily kept walking, not fast, not timidly, at the speed of a woman done being routed through other people's entrances, If revenge has a sound before it begins, it is silence, miscalculating how long it can survive in a crowded room. Vanessa appeared at the far end of the foyer in a deep green gown that matched the town car and the old appetite in her eyes. For one awful second, I saw pure shock on her face. Then she edited it in real time. That was always her gift. Editing. By the time she reached us, the shock had been folded into concern so polished it might have fooled strangers. "Lily," she said, soft enough to bless herself with the sound, "you should not be here in this state." There it was. Not "where have you been?" Not "I'm glad you're safe." Not "why did you leave your father's house?" This state. Lily looked at her like she had finally grown old enough to stop confusing venom for perfume. "No," she said, "you shouldn't." Vanessa's mouth tightened. She shifted to me. "Daniel, what exactly are you doing?" "Arriving," I said. That should have been a useless answer. In that foyer, with 3 years of lies hanging in the coat check air, it felt perfect. Pastor Cole joined us 5 seconds later. No rush. That was important to him. Men like him believe haste is a confession if displayed in public. "Daniel," he said, and even then his tone was shaped for witnesses first. "I understand you are upset, but bringing Lily into this environment against counsel is dangerous." Lily spoke before I could. "Against whose counsel, Nathan? Yours, Marcus's, or the one where geography keeps changing whenever the receipts get nervous?" Arthur Penn made a small choking sound into his wine. Vanessa cut in sharply. "This is neither the time nor the place." That was when Gloria Benton drifted past behind them, carrying a donor name badge, and said to no one in particular, "Funny how the wrong time and place always seem to be whichever ones have the most witnesses." I could have kissed her on the forehead. Cole saw Gloria, saw the investigators he did not yet know were investigators, saw Priya near the back doors in black, not hiding, just waiting. Saw Arthur Penn beginning to understand that decorative men sometimes accidentally decorate crime scenes. His face did not change much. His strategy did. He smiled, the smile of a man who had just decided to outconfidence the disaster. "Of course," he said, looking around at the widening circle of attention. "We welcome all who return. Lily's presence tonight is unexpected, but perhaps the spirit prefers surprise to our planning." That line almost deserved applause for sheer predatory recovery. Vanessa, too quick to be subtle now, took Lily lightly by the wrist. "Come with me. We'll get you somewhere quiet." Lily did not move. Instead, she looked down at Vanessa's hand until Vanessa let go, because there are some gestures that cannot survive being watched by even mildly conscious people. "I've been somewhere quiet long enough," Lily said. The foyer had gone completely silent now. No quartet, no donor chatter, just cutlery from the service hall and the dry little rustle of expensive clothing against itself as people tried not to look like they were looking. Cole spread one hand. "Friends," he said to the room, "there are family tensions here that deserve privacy." "No," I said, and my voice carried farther than I expected. "What deserved privacy got it for 3 years. Tonight deserves truth." A murmur moved through the crowd like wind through tall grass. That was the first crack. Cole saw it too. He shifted immediately to sermon mode, voice deepening, posture opening toward the room instead of toward me. That was always his trick. Turn accusation into congregation. Turn the man pointing at you into just one wounded soul among many needing wiser interpretation. "We have walked beside Daniel through profound grief," he said, "and we have borne witness to Lily's difficult healing with more discretion than most communities manage. If pain now seeks spectacle, I ask only that we answer it with compassion." There it was, compassion as muzzle, discretion as camouflage, healing as the ownership word. I looked around the foyer, at the donors, at the choir parents, at the old women from the prayer circle, at Arthur Penn, at the mayor's wife, at the 2 teenagers working coat check who had probably heard more truth in hallways than half the adults here had allowed themselves to recognize. Then I looked at my daughter. She gave the smallest nod. So I said, "You want compassion, Nathan? Then let everyone here see who you told me was in Prague." Lily stepped forward. No stage lights yet, no microphone. Just the foyer and the truth occupying the same square footage for once. "My name is Lily Hale," she said. "I was never in Prague." If you have ever heard a crowded room forget how to breathe, that was the sound. Arthur Penn actually said, "Jesus Christ," out loud into his own lapel flower. Vanessa recovered first. "Lily is confused. She has been under severe..." Lily cut straight through her. "I was kept in the choir attic and in 2 church-owned houses under names you used in donor letters. I was made to write gratitude statements, record healing messages, and disappear whenever my father's money needed a story." No one moved. Then a woman near the registration table whispered, "The choir attic?" That was the second crack. Not because everyone believed immediately, because the phrase was too concrete to smooth into metaphor. Attic. Not mission, not retreat. Attic. Cole raised his voice half a degree. "That is a grotesque distortion." Priya Shah stepped forward. "Good," she said. "Then it will collapse easily under documents." And just like that, Law entered the foyer dressed for dinner and murdered ambiguity on the tile. You could feel the room reassigning authority in real time. Cole's voice was still polished. Priya's was still flat. But Polish had just met Subpoena in front of 200 people. It is not a fair fight. Vanessa tried one last maneuver. Tears. Perfectly timed. Exactly enough. Daniel, she said, turning toward me and not the crowd, because intimacy was her last good weapon. Please, whatever she believes right now, don't do this here. Not like this. There are moments in marriage when you realize the person opposite you is still addressing the version of you she built years earlier. The man who would protect a room from discomfort at his own expense. The man who would choose the smaller public wound and call it dignity. That was the man she married. He had paid well. He was not standing in the foyer anymore. I'm not the one doing this here, I said. You brought it into my house, my checks, my daughter, and my name. The room just got large enough to fit it. Cole saw the crowd slipping. So he did what preachers do when facts arrive before permission. He pivoted to the sanctuary. Everyone, he said, please take your seats. We will begin the program and then address this with order and grace. That was smart. Very smart. Because once people sit facing a stage, they begin unconsciously accepting the stage's right to define the story. Standing in a foyer, truth is horizontal. Seated in rows, it becomes vertical again. Lily heard it too. So before anyone moved, she lifted the violin case, opened it, and took out the instrument right there between the coat check and the mission banners. Vanessa's face went white. Cole's went hard. Do not, Cole said. Lily looked at him. Do not what? Sound like myself? Then she set the violin under her chin and played the opening line of the piece she had performed at 16 in the high school auditorium while Elise cried quietly into a tissue, and I pretended the lights were the reason my own eyes hurt. Every person in that foyer who had known my family knew the piece. Not because they were educated, because Lily had played it at church Christmas programs, scholarship dinners, memorials, and one terrible town council charity evening where the microphone failed and she played through the feedback anyway out of pure spite. The sound went up through the entry hall and into the rafters, and for the first time that night something holy actually happened in the building. Not because it was religious, because it belonged to her and not to them. People stopped pretending not to understand. You could see it happen, not all at once, in faces, choir mothers, bored wives, the bank couple, Arthur Penn, 2 ushers, a donor from Scranton who lowered his champagne glass like the price of denial had finally exceeded the social benefit. Lily finished the phrase, then lowered the violin and said, You all sent money to a place that never existed. You applauded letters I was forced to sign. You prayed for a mission while I was 30 feet above your choir loft copying gratitude into envelopes. This time, nobody asked for privacy. They wanted specifics. Mercer County only pretends to hate scandal until scandal proves itself worth the parking situation. A woman from the finance committee said, Arthur, is that true? Another asked, What attic? Someone near the sanctuary doors said, I told you there was singing up there at night. Cole lifted both hands. Please, please. That old room controlling gesture. Documents are being grossly misinterpreted by people under distress. This congregation will not let grief and hostility rewrite years of careful ministry because of a family rupture and a few stolen files. There it was, stolen files. He had finally said it in public. Priya did not smile. She did not need to. A few? She asked. Interesting word choice. Then she nodded once toward Aaron Bell at the AV console by the sanctuary. The screens came alive. Not the mission montage, not the donor slideshow, not the rendering of the future Hale Center. First came the Prague website screenshot next to the mail forwarding office lease. Then the Shell nonprofit filings. Then the Morningside housing trail. Then my checks. Then the letters with tone guides. Then the page from transition management that used my daughter's life as bullet points under family leverage. Then, because Priya understood that numbers wound the mind, but voices wound the myth, the audio from Monday night began to play. What Vanessa sounds like when she thinks a room already belongs to her is different from what she sounds like in marriage, in public, or at dinner. Sharper, bored, less interested in hiding contempt behind concern. Because if we called it what it was, he would have dragged you home the first month out of guilt and ruined everything. Then Cole, those are not opposites. Then Vanessa again, we made you survivable. Then Cole, the center was the logical culmination. A permanent space for sacred strings, women's restoration residencies, donor confidence, and your eventual reintegration through curated visibility. Then Vanessa, your father paid because he needed to believe he was helping someone. The foyer became something larger than a scene. It became loss of faith happening in real time and not in the way any sermon writer would have wanted. People did not scream at first. That is the fantasy version. What they did was worse for Cole and Vanessa. They stepped back. Faith leaders survive scandal on residual belief. The second people physically step back, the story has already started rotting from the center. Arthur Penn sat down on a chair by the registration table, like gravity had arrived personally for him. One of the choir mothers began crying. The Scranton donor muttered, Jesus, in the tone of a man discovering he had confused tax write-offs with sainthood for years. Vanessa moved toward the screens. No, she snapped. Turn that off. The word snapped across the hall without any of its usual silk, and that alone converted 3 more people in the room from hesitant to certain. Cole tried the only move left. Daniel, he said, turning toward me with a face built for funerals and appeals. You still have the power to stop this before every good work connected to this church is poisoned by your rage. There it was, the final insult. My rage, as if this had begun in me, as if my daughter's attic had been an emotional weather pattern instead of their architecture. I took 1 step toward him, not fast, not threatening, just enough for him to know the man he had billed, guided, softened, and used for 3 years was close enough now to be addressed without pulpit distance. Then I said the thing I had been carrying since the violin case slid under the stall door. You hid my daughter over your own choir loft and sold me her absence as a foreign ministry. You used my dead wife's name to flatter my guilt. You wrote letters in her voice. You planned to take my warehouse, mount my family name above it, and display her as proof you had healed what you were actually profiting from. I let the room hear every word. Don't ever say rage like it arrived here first. No one applauded. Good. This was not theater, even if theater had been their favorite tool. Priya signaled. The uniformed officers entered through the side doors. Not running, not dramatic. Procedure again. Blessed, deliberate procedure. Pastor Nathan Cole, one of them said, you are being detained pending charges related to charitable fraud, coercive control, unlawful confinement, and evidence tampering. Vanessa Hale, the same applies to you. That is when Vanessa finally lost her style. Not in tears, in anger. You think he did this because of her? She said, pointing at Lily with a hand that had once signed my birthday cards. He did this because he cannot stand being shut out. He would rather burn a church than admit a woman might heal without him. Lily answered before I could. No, she said. He did this because you thought hiding me made him easier to invoice. Vanessa stared at her as if the sentence itself had slapped harder than any hand. Cole tried not to be led immediately. He turned once more to the crowd. My friends, one of the choir mothers said very clearly, don't. That little word did more damage than the hand on his elbow. Because it came not from law, not from me, not from a hostile world he could sermonize against, but from inside his own room. He went still after that. As the officers moved them toward the side hall, Arthur Penn finally found his spine, though not in a way that deserved applause. I had no idea, he said to no one and everyone. Gloria, standing 2 feet away with her donor badge still pinned on, said, That's not innocence, Arthur. That's laziness wearing cufflinks. I almost laughed. Didn't. But almost. Then Lily stepped into the sanctuary. Not the foyer, not the side hall, the sanctuary itself. The live stream still ran, the screen still glowed, the candles still pretended this was a fundraiser. She walked up the center aisle carrying her violin and stopped at the place where the stage lights just caught her face. And because taking down a lie is one thing, but replacing it with the right sound matters too. She played. Not for Cole. Not for Vanessa. Not even for me. For the room. For the people who had mistaken polish for grace. For the women whose names had been filed under restoration voices. For the years those rafters had heard copied hymns and corrected gratitude and thought they were listening to devotion when they were really listening to captivity trying to stay useful. She played the piece all the way through. No one clapped when it ended. They stood. That was better. A standing room with no applause is not admiration. It is reckoning. Priya later told me the live stream made the case easier. Hard to argue misinterpretation when half the county watched the screen switch from donor logos to shell companies while your congregation physically recoiled from you in high definition. I did not need legal analysis to know what mattered. What mattered was that the lie lost its stage in front of the very people it had been built to impress. That was the revenge part no prison sentence could replace. Not because public humiliation is holy. Because some systems only survive by looking cleaner than the people they wound. Once the looking clean part dies, the system starts collapsing faster than law alone can make it collapse. By the time the last donor car pulled out of the parking lot that night, the Hale Center rendering had been taken off the screens, the mission banners had been pulled down by volunteers who suddenly wanted their own hands clean, and the sanctuary smelled not of candles and charity but of overheated projectors and something more useful. Truth after electricity. After the Jubilee, Mercer split into 3 kinds of people. The first kind said they had always known something was wrong. They hadn't. They just preferred memory after danger because it made cowardice feel like foresight. The second kind said no one could have known. That was closer. Still too gentle. A lot of people could have asked better questions and chose not to because polished evil is easier to host than to interrupt. The third kind stopped talking about what they had or had not known and started asking what needed to be repaired now. Those were the only people worth much to me in the first month after. Priya's team moved fast once the livestream turned private suspicion into public evidence. Cole's office computers yielded donor lists, coaching notes, Draft letters, erased housing rosters, and one spreadsheet labeled continuity mapping that tracked women by category, family pressure, donor usefulness, and testimonial viability. Vanessa's laptop gave them the softer half of the crime. Template letters, voice edits, visual presentation notes, suggested phrasing for me, calendar marks tied to my check writing patterns. One line, in yellow beside my name, respond best to injury and legacy. I read that line at Priya's office and felt the odd, flat calm that arrives only when a person discovers he has been professionally studied by someone he once trusted to share a bed with him. Marcus took his own turn collapsing under evidence. His consultancy had worked with 3 other churches. Not all on the same scale. Enough. Always the same language. Containment, stabilization, protective distance, transition housing, family interference. The state medical board suspended his license within a week. Permanent revocation came later, after the recordings, the billing trails, and the testimony from women who had finally begun returning calls, once Lily's face on the live stream made it impossible to pretend they had imagined the rooms they had been kept in. Arthur Penn turned cooperative faster than old paper in rain. Gloria was right. Decorative men do eventually help when prison and embarrassment start competing for their attention. Arthur had known the donors were being told prettier stories than the paperwork deserved. He had known the Prague site was administrative fiction. He had signed property planning studies for my warehouse before I agreed. He had approved temporary internal care arrangements without asking where temporary was or for whom. He cried in his deposition. I did not feel moved. He said he never thought Lily was literally in the building. I believed him. That did not help his case with me much. There are many forms of enabling. Some of them are upholstered and vote at board meetings. The church board fractured by week 2. Half wanted to fire everyone and cooperate. Half wanted to salvage the institution by blaming Cole and Vanessa as aberrations while keeping donor confidence alive. Mercer's mayor called for accountability in a statement polished enough to avoid every word that might threaten the tax base. The bank couple returned their own names from a brass donor wall and requested privacy, which was, to my mind, the most elegant confession of vanity they could manage. Lily watched all of this from my kitchen table, my porch, my truck, and the little office above the store where she began helping Gloria sort files, because if trauma does one useful thing sometimes, it makes certain people extremely good at pattern recognition once someone hands them a clean pencil and a reason. She still did not sleep well. Not really. The first week she woke 3 nights in a row at exactly 2:17 and walked the downstairs hallway until I found her standing by the coat closet staring at the deadbolt. "What's 2:17?" I asked the 3rd time. Her face changed, not into memory, into shame. "Room check," she said. "At the attic. Vanessa used to come up at 2:17 after donor nights if she thought I might have heard too much through the vent." I did not ask what those checks involved, not because I was afraid to know, because she was clearly choosing which rooms inside herself to open in what order, and fathers do not get to kick those doors in just because they have finally learned how to hate properly. Instead, I said, "This house doesn't do room checks." She nodded. Then after a second asked, "Can you say that again?" So I did, and again the next night, and the one after that. Recovery is humiliating that way sometimes. Not noble, not cinematic, just the same honest sentence repeated enough times that the nervous system begins, very slowly, to stop accusing the walls. The trial did not start for 11 months. In the meantime, life kept trying to happen around the case. The store still needed ordering. Spring still came, mulch still sold out before Easter. Someone still brought back the wrong size furnace filter and insisted I had changed the packaging personally. Children still rode bikes past the porch. The world continued committing the rude miracle of ordinary time. Lily helped at the store 2 afternoons a week by summer. Not because I needed free labor, because shelves with prices on them and cash drawers that closed square turned out to be unexpectedly good medicine. At first, she only did inventory, then special orders, then customer questions from behind the counter where she had once stood as a teenager rolling her eyes at every man who asked if his wife had sent him for the wrong thing. The first time someone from church walked in while she was there, the air in the aisle changed. Mrs. Farley, choir alto, widowed, silver cross so large it looked like furniture. She froze beside the weather stripping rack. Lily froze too. Then Mrs. Farley did something none of us had expected. She put both hands on the counter and said, "I am ashamed I applauded your letters. Not apology as performance, not church apology. Not if I hurt you in misunderstandings and grace in complex times. Ashamed." Lily looked at her for a very long moment and said, "Good, that's at least in the right neighborhood." Mrs. Farley actually laughed, a shocked laugh, but real. Then she bought weather stripping she clearly did not need and left looking 10 years more honest. That was how much of the summer went. People walking in with guilt. Lily deciding, case by case, whether they had earned being spoken to as humans or as weather. I never interfered. That was one decision I got right on the first try. By August, Priya had secured enough cooperating testimony from other women to widen the charges. Not every story matched Lily's exactly. Some had shorter timelines, some involved housing rather than attics, some involved pregnancies, medication pressure, or coerced testimony for donors. But the core remained the same. Remove, rename, manage, monetize, reintroduce only when useful. The law prefers patterns to monsters. Patterns convict better. Monsters give defense lawyers too much mythology to work with. Cole entered trial in a navy suit and a face built from old confidence. Vanessa entered in cream and silence. Marcus entered looking like the sort of man who still half believed superior vocabulary ought to count as innocence if used in measured tones. It did not. I testified on day 3, Gloria on day 4, Arthur on day 6, where he managed the difficult feat of looking both guilty and offended by guilt at the same time. Rachel Devlin testified by video. Mrs. Farley testified about hearing Violin through the north vents late at night and deciding, because she was a woman trained by churches, that asking the obvious question might count as disloyalty. Lily testified on day 8. I will not tell you every word she said. Some parts belong to her. In ways, even victory does not make public property. But I will tell you this. She did not testify like a victim. She testified like a witness who had finally gotten clear enough to hate the architecture more than she hated herself. When the defense tried to suggest her time in the church properties had been voluntary in the broad spiritual sense, she answered, "So is drowning if you tell someone the shore would kill their father." When they tried to imply her letters reflected sincere growth, she said, "A script can still contain your handwriting. That doesn't make it your freedom." When they pressed her on why she did not leave sooner, she looked at the jury and said, "Because coercion that works doesn't feel like a locked door first. It feels like the destruction of everyone you love if you touch the handle." That line changed the room. You could see it. The jurors stopped listening as if to a complicated church dispute and began listening as if to a machine being explained from the inside by the person it had been built to grind. The prosecution used the recordings carefully, not because they lacked force, because too much force makes some jurors retreat. Priya knew that. She let the money trail do the cold work. She let the tone guides do the eerie work. She let the property planning files do the motive work. And then she let Vanessa and Cole's own voices do the human work. Your father paid because he needed to believe he was helping someone. The center was the logical culmination. You were impossible. We made you survivable. Those lines did not sound as elegant in court as they had in small rooms. That is one of the pleasures of transcription. It strips charisma down to sentence bones and makes jurors decide whether the skeleton deserves a choir. It didn't. Verdicts came in less than a day, guilty where it mattered most: fraud, conspiracy, unlawful confinement, charitable solicitation under false pretenses, tampering, coercive control counts where applicable. Marcus took additional penalties under medical and prescription violations. Vanessa got fewer years than Cole. Cole got fewer years than I wanted. Marcus got less than either because language experts always seem to leave cracks to climb through. That bothered me. It still does. Justice and satisfaction are cousins at best, but conviction is not the only way revenge can arrive. The church itself folded 6 months later. Not the building, the institution, insurance, civil suits, donor clawbacks, tax review, board resignations, 3 families pulling children from choir programs and then telling 3 more families why, a bishop from 2 counties oversaying the phrase catastrophic governance failure into a microphone, as if that were the most devastating thing a sanctuary could hear. For me, the deeper revenge came smaller and later. The warehouse stayed mine, not because I suddenly loved property more. Because property had become part of the lie, and I wanted one object in the world to refuse their meaning completely. Then Lily came to me in October with sketches. Not architectural, rough, pencil lines, coffee rings, angry arrows, window notes, door notes. One room labeled no lock that opens from outside, another labeled instrument library, one open rectangle labeled community floor because stages should not always be higher. "What is this?" I asked. She stood in my office with sawdust on her sleeve from helping Danny unload trim and said, "The thing they pretended to build." That was the first time I understood the full shape of her revenge. Not just expose, not just convict, replace. Take the object they wanted, the building they had already started spending in brochures, and turn it into exactly what they lied about but could never have tolerated because it would not have made captivity profitable. A real music space, scholarships, open practice rooms, no residential wing, no spiritual oversight, no locked attic, no testimonials, no donor language stronger than the receipts. Just music. Children, teachers paid on time, mothers allowed to sit in chairs and listen, doors meaning what doors mean. We named it the Elise Room first. Then the whole thing became the Hale Workshop for strings and wood, because Lily said music and hardware had both raised her, and revenge should sometimes honor the whole family instead of just the wound. Gloria called it the first decent use of legacy by this surname in months. She handled the nonprofit filings herself, because she said no pious committee would ever touch our books while she still had wrists. We offered Ezra the first scholarship. When I told him, he stared at me from behind a rack of paint rollers like maybe good news had become a trick category and he needed more evidence. Real one? He asked. Real one. Not church real? No. He nodded slowly, then said, okay, then my mother can stop flinching every time I say rehearsal. That was the kind of sentence the town deserved to hear and probably never will, because children should not have to spend their best lines fixing adult institutions. By winter, the warehouse smelled like cedar and fresh plaster. By February, it had heat. By March, Lily was arguing with electricians about outlet height like a woman who had not spent 3 years being told the room belonged to somebody else. That alone was worth more than any sentence the judge eventually read. On the first open house day, people came in cautiously. Mercer is brave only after 3 other people have already parked. Mrs. Farley came first with lemon squares and no church pin. Arthur Penn sent a donation with no name attached. We returned it. Gloria said anonymous money was just cowardice in Kashmir and she would not process it. Rachel Devlin drove in from Ohio and stood in the doorway crying before Lily even reached her. They did not speak for a full minute. Then Rachel said, I thought I was the only file. Lily said, me too. That was enough to start something neither of them owed us the right to witness much of. We hung no donor wall, no founder plaques, no names in brass large enough to become another category of weapon. Instead, near the front entrance, Lily put one sentence in small dark letters where everyone had to come close to read it. Nothing hidden in this building gets called healing. That was the revenge. Not the courthouse exactly, not the cuffs, not the headlines, not even the live stream. That sentence. Those open doors, the windows we refused to frost, the practice rooms that locked only from the inside and could be opened by a child. The receipts Gloria balanced every month with the fury of a woman determined never to let holiness become an accounting exemption again. The first time music drifted out of that building at dusk, while I locked the store next door, I stopped on the sidewalk and just listened. The months after the convictions were full of paperwork, so vindicating and so miserable that some evenings I came home feeling like justice and bookkeeping had married for the sole purpose of exhausting me. Civil claims, asset freezes, insurance fights, bishop letters, foundation recovery notices. One former donor threatening to sue everyone with a pulse because he said humiliation had caused cardiac strain at the Jubilee, and apparently his heart distinguished very sharply between sin and embarrassment. Gloria framed that letter for 2 days before Priya made her take it down. Vanessa tried a different performance after sentencing, remorse shaped like scarcity. Through counsel, she wanted a meeting with Lily for spiritual closure and practical amends. That phrase alone made my daughter laugh so hard she scared herself. Then she cried for 20 minutes because laughter after captivity sometimes feels too much like a window opening in the wrong season. She declined the meeting and sent back one written sentence instead. Nothing practical you want can amend what you made conceptual. Priya called it the best refusal in the entire file. I agreed. Marcus, from prison, attempted what educated predators often attempt once charisma loses its room. Authorship. He began drafting a manuscript proposal through counsel about grief, spiritual authority, and moral overcorrection in public institutions. Yes, really. Apparently, even after conviction, he still believed his highest calling was controlling the vocabulary around what he had done. Priya's office shut down the publication angle through evidentiary restrictions and victims' rights motions before it got traction. But the fact that he tried taught me something important. Some men never stop seeing other people's suffering as raw material for their own narrative repair. The bars changed his address, not his appetite. Lily's revenge continued growing long after the court stopped being the loudest room. That was how I knew it was healthy, or at least healthier than the forms of revenge built only from adrenaline. She did not want them merely punished. She wanted replacement architecture wherever replacement was possible. If the church had hidden women inside donor language, she wanted open books. If the attic had trained obedience through silence, she wanted rooms where children heard themselves loudly and safely. If letters had been used to flatten her into a testimony unit, she wanted bulletin boards full of badly written thank you notes and half-finished scales, and parents who lingered too long because no one was trying to make lingering feel dangerous. The warehouse conversion started in stages, because real revenge, like real repair, has to answer to invoices. Danny handled the structural side with the reverence some men reserve for old engines and injured animals. Arthur Penn's former architect, eager to avoid appearing in another hearing, volunteered consultation hours through counsel. We accepted the labor and refused the public plaque he later attempted to attach to it. The loading bay became a rehearsal hall. The old receiving office became instrument storage. 2 upstairs rooms became small teaching studios, with windows left gloriously uncurtained, even when afternoon sun made everyone complain. Lily insisted on that point. No filtered light in rooms where kids are learning to trust themselves, she said. No one argued. Some of the most difficult rebuilding happened in places nobody touring the finished workshop would ever notice. Door hardware. Lily checked every interior lock herself. If a room had to lock for instrument safety, it could only ever be secured from inside while occupied and opened from outside with ordinary force if someone panicked. No hidden deadbolts. No decorative latches high enough to create hierarchy. No bells, ever. When the electrician asked whether she wanted a call button in the large rehearsal room in case teachers needed help, her whole face went white before she steadied and answered, "No signals children can mistake for punishment." So we used old human methods instead. Raise your hand, step into the hall, call a name. Simple things. You would be surprised how wholly simple things start to feel after complexity has been weaponized against your child. Ezra arrived at the workshop before anyone else the week we started receiving instruments. Not for scholarship orientation, just to watch. He sat on an upside-down bucket near the back wall, while Danny and I carried in donated stands, and Lily tuned a used viola that had survived 3 school districts and 1 nasty divorce. Finally, he asked, "Can I ask something weird?" Lily told him yes. He said, "If it's not church, why does it still feel quiet like church before service?" She thought for a second and answered, "Because rooms can be quiet without hiding anything. You're hearing the difference." That boy nodded like he had been given a tool more useful than a wrench. Months later, I found him explaining the same idea to a younger girl, frightened of closed practice room doors. That is how healing moves when it is real. One accurate sentence, finding a new mouth. There were setbacks, of course there were. People love clean after stories because they are easier to display than the truth. The truth is a Tuesday in November when a donor envelope arrives with no return name and Lily cannot open mail for 2 days because paper still feels like a delivery system for management. The truth is a snowstorm night when Ezra misses rehearsal and Lily spirals because absence still smells faintly like secret relocation. The truth is my own shame, turning up in practical clothes at odd hours. One afternoon, I found myself apologizing to a wall of uninstalled acoustic panels because Lily had just asked whether I had ever once truly believed she wanted not to hear my voice for 3 years, and I did not know how to answer without indicting the man I had been. That was the day Gloria found me in Bay 2 pretending to organize fasteners by existential regret and said, "You do know fathers cannot retroactively become detectives by self-hatred." It was not comfort. It helped anyway. The first holiday season after the convictions came like a dare. Vanessa had colonized Christmas expertly in my memory. Cream ribbon, controlled menus, candles that smelled expensive enough to suggest everyone present had their life under artistic review. Lily stood in the front room with a box of old ornaments and said, "I want to do this badly on purpose." So we did. Too many lights on the tree. Store-bought cookies next to Gloria's terrifying fruitcake. Children from the workshop stomping salt onto the entry rug. Ezra playing scales by the hallway because he wanted background noise that sounds alive. At one point, Lily hung the old fake Prague ornament Vanessa had once displayed like proof and stared at it for a long second. Then she handed it to me and said, "Can we smash this without becoming symbolic people?" I said yes. We took it to the loading dock and dropped it under a tire. Not poetic, perfect. January brought the first board of visitors who wanted to partner with the workshop because public shame had finally forced Mercer to discover a conscience with grants attached. I distrusted them all on instinct. Lily distrusted them professionally. There is a difference. She built intake rules on the whiteboard before the meeting. No language stronger than the services actually offered. No testimonial requests from current students. No scholarship named after a donor while they are still alive to enjoy it. No private pastoral counseling on site. No off-book housing under any circumstances. No cameras in rooms where children think. Gloria added no anonymous gifts and underlined it twice. The board visitors laughed nervously at first, and then, realizing no one else was laughing, started taking notes as if ethics had just been discovered on the premises that morning. We did partner with 2 of them later, on our terms. That matters. It matters more to me now than it once would have, because one of the side effects of surviving manipulation is learning that terms are never background furniture. They are the room. About 6 months in, Lily asked for all the old letters, not copies, the actual ones. The Prague packets, the envelopes, the bookmarks, the postcards. I had kept everything in a banker's box because fathers of my generation hoard evidence without admitting when it became evidence. We carried the box to the workshop office and sat on the floor among rosin dust and extension cords while she opened them one by one. Sometimes she laughed, sometimes she went still. Sometimes she would read one sentence aloud and then explain exactly which part was hers, which part was Vanessa's, and which part carried Nathan's polished fingerprints even where he had never touched the page. That exercise nearly undid me. For Lily, though, it became taxonomy, the reclaiming of authorship through dissection. By the end, she had built 3 piles, mine, theirs, contaminated. I asked what contaminated meant. She answered, the sentences where I can't tell whether I started believing them while I was writing. We burned only that pile in the barrel out back after dark, not the entire archive, just the words that had moved too far inside her to keep around safely. Sometimes revenge is public. Sometimes it is a daughter standing in a workyard watching smoke rise from grammar that used to own part of her breathing. Near the 1-year mark, Priya called to say one more woman wanted to meet Lily before deciding whether to testify in the related civil matter. Rachel Devlin, the Ohio case. Alive, yes, but still living half tucked inside the old categories they had built around her. Lily drove 3 hours to meet her without me. When she came back that night, she sat on the workbench by the loading bay and said, I think I understand something now. I waited. She said, they always told us we were special cases because special cases don't organize. If you convince enough women that each room was built uniquely for them, they never realized there was a contractor. That line ended up on the back of our first workshop brochure in tiny type under the scholarship information, not because it was catchy, but because accuracy deserved circulation too. The workshop slowly became more than a building and less than an institution, which is exactly what we wanted. A place, not a brand. Children came after school and left with sheet music sticking out of backpacks next to math homework and lunchboxes. Parents sat in metal chairs and traded weather complaints instead of offering sacrificial donor language. On Saturdays, the big hall smelled like cedar, coffee, and nervous strings. If someone cried, nobody called it a breakthrough unless the person crying did. If someone wanted the door open, the door stayed open. If someone wanted silence, the silence belonged to them and not to a bell or a schedule or a soft-voiced man with a theology of control. The first anniversary recital happened on a wet evening in early spring. Not a gala, never that. Fold-out chairs, paper programs, children missing entrances and then finding them again, parents filming badly, good brownies, Gloria in the second row daring anyone with a camera flash to test the limits of her citizenship. Lily played last, not because she wanted drama, because the beginners had to get home on a school night. She stood in the same black dress from the Jubilee, though altered now because she said revenge clothes eventually deserve promotion to ordinary life if they survive honestly. Before she lifted the violin, she looked at the audience and said, this room was built because too many people confused management with care. We don't do that here. We listen better. Then she played. Not for Vanessa, not for Cole. Not for the live stream ghosts or the donor tables or the attic vent, for the room that existed now. Open windows, children breathing where they pleased, parents visible, no one hidden above anyone else. When she finished, the applause sounded like what applause should sound like. Not purchase, not proof, just gratitude with hands. I stood in the back and let it hit me properly for the first time that the workshop was no longer revenge wearing a tool belt. It had become life. Real life, which is harder, better, and far more humiliating to the people who tried to turn your child into a business model. That, more than any sentence, felt like the last expensive thing we took back from them. Violin, bad cello tuning, someone laughing, a teacher saying again, but this time don't apologize with your bow. No one hiding above it, no one being translated into a funding story, no one waiting for permission to open a window. I thought then that if revenge has a noble form at all, maybe it is not destruction. Maybe it is building the honest version in the same town where the dishonest one once got away with better lighting. There was one thing left I did not expect to do. Vanessa asked to see me before sentencing. Her lawyer phrased it as a personal request in the interest of closure, which is the kind of sentence people use when they want access to someone else's conscience without paying retail for it. I said no. Then I said no again. Then, 3 days later, yes. Not because she deserved it, because I wanted to hear whether a person like Vanessa still knew the language of truth once the audience was concrete walls and fluorescent lights. The county visitation room smelled like bleach and tired anger. She wore tan jail clothing and looked smaller, which should not be confused with gentler. Some people shrink when power leaves them and only reveal the exact hard shape they always had. For the first minute, she just stared at me. Then she said, "You look older. So do you." A tiny smile touched her mouth. Not warmth, habit. I suppose we're past pretending. We were past it before you married me. I just arrived late. That landed. Good. She folded her hands on the table between us. No ring, no silk, no room styling. And still she somehow looked like she believed posture could invoice reality one last time. I didn't marry you for the warehouse, she said. Interesting place to start. It's also true. I waited. I married you because after Elise died, you walked through that town like a house still standing after fire. Burned through, but standing. There's a kind of power in that. A kind of safety. She looked down once, then back at me. The warehouse mattered later, the church mattered later, Nathan mattered later, but you were the first thing I chose. That should have moved me. It did not. Not because it was definitely false. Because truth used that way is just another instrument in the hand that broke everything else. So what did I become after? I asked. She answered instantly. A man who could be persuaded by duty. There it was, the clean sentence. Maybe the cleanest she would ever give me. And Lily? Vanessa's eyes shifted for the first time. A flicker. Something like fatigue. She was never going to let anything stay arranged. That was as close as Vanessa could come to admitting motive with her own child-shaped language stripped away. Not monster. Not profit. Not cruelty. Arrangement. You hid my daughter because she ruined your arrangement. She threatened collapse. Vanessa leaned back. You think evil always feels evil while you do it. It doesn't. Sometimes it feels administrative, necessary, like a mess someone stronger has to contain because weaker people won't survive the truth. There are sentences so wrong they become almost educational. I looked at her for a long moment, then said, "And did you survive it?" That was the first honest blow that landed. She went still, really still. Because prison, scandal, losing the church, losing the house, losing the donors, losing the elegant life, none of that had touched the core story she kept about herself the way that question did. Did you survive it? No heroic answer, no reform speech, no performance of rebirth. Just a woman in County Beige facing the possibility that the structure she spent years building had not made her stronger, only smaller and harder to reach. She did not answer, at least not with words. When the guard told us time was up, Vanessa said the one thing she had probably been saving as the sharpest blade. Lily will never fully trust rooms again. I stood. No, I said, but she'll build better ones than you ever could. Then I left her there with the fluorescent lights and the sentence she had earned. I did not tell Lily about that meeting for 2 weeks. Not because I wanted secrets again, because I needed to understand what, if anything, I had actually brought back from it, besides the smell of disinfectant and the old reflex to go wash my hands. When I finally told her, she was sitting on the floor of the workshop with Ezra and 3 younger students, correcting bow grips and pretending not to enjoy being obeyed in a room where obedience cost nothing ugly. She listened. Then she asked, "Do you think she meant that as a curse?" "Yes, and?" I looked around the workshop, sun through the big front windows, rosin on the air, open cases, kids arguing about whether counting rests was tyranny, Gloria in the office pretending not to listen while absolutely listening. No hidden rooms, no frosted glass, no soft language trying to turn control into mercy. "And," I said, "I think she misunderstood what trust grows back into when it has decent lumber." That got me a real smile. Not the tiny attic versions, a full one I had not seen since before Ben died. "You're getting better at this," she said. "At what?" "Answering hard things without trying to finish them too quickly. I would like to tell you that fatherhood has a moment where you know you are doing it right. It doesn't. What it has, if you are lucky, is occasional proof you're doing it less wrong than before." The first recital at the workshop happened in May. We did not call it a gala. We did not sell tickets. We did not print glossy cards about transformation. We set out folding chairs, brewed coffee that was too strong, laid out grocery store cookies, and let children make honest noise in a room designed not to punish it. Lily insisted on opening the evening herself. I argued she should save her strength. She ignored me with such familiar irritation that for a second I forgot the attic entirely and felt only the ordinary annoyance of raising a daughter who inherited my refusal to be sensibly managed. When the chairs filled and the room went quiet, she stepped to the front with her violin. No speech at first, just music. The same piece she had played in the church foyer. But this time it sounded different. Not because the notes changed, because the room did. The sound did not have to prove her existence anymore. It got to be music again. After the piece, she set the violin down and said, "Some of you came here after seeing very ugly things in public. Some of you came because your children need a place to learn without being turned into symbols. Some of you came because you're still not sure what you're looking at, and I respect that more than easy certainty." She glanced at me. "This building is for people who want sound without control, that's all." That was the whole speech. Perfect. No grand moral, no brand, no testimony, no carefully packaged injury. Just a line simple enough to survive being true. When the recital ended, people stayed. That is how I knew we had done something real. Real spaces are hard to leave because nothing in them is performing urgency. Children ran between chairs, parents lingered by the coffee. Mrs. Farley brought lemon bars and did not mention church once. Rachel Devlin took down volunteer names. Ezra argued with a cello student about metronomes. Gloria stood by the donation jar, glaring at anyone who looked too pious while contributing. Lily came and stood beside me near the back wall. "Did you ever think this was the revenge part?" she asked. "What do you mean?" She nodded toward the room. The noise, the openness, the impossible ordinariness of it. I used to think revenge meant watching them fall. I wanted that for a long time. She tucked one strand of hair behind her ear. Now I think it might be this, making the thing they lied about without having to lie. I looked around the workshop, then at my daughter. "You can have both," I said. "They fell." She laughed. softly. True. We stood there a little longer, then she said, "Do you know what I remember most from the attic?" I braced without meaning to. She noticed. Of course she did. "Not the lock," she said. "Not Vanessa, not Nathan, not even the letters." She looked toward the windows. The sound of traffic outside at dinner time. I used to listen through the wall and try to guess what everybody below thought they were doing with their evening. I made whole lives out of brake lights and engines because I couldn't step into any of them. She let that sit. Now I can't get over how funny it is that freedom sounds like folding chairs, bad cookies, and a child sawing a note half to death in the wrong octave. I felt something in my throat go tight. That's a very specific theology. It's the only one I trust. When the last family left and we started stacking chairs, Lily handed me the small brass plate we had taken off the old workshop entrance 2 days earlier. No donor names, no honorary board titles, just the sentence from the first day, engraved now instead of temporary vinyl. Nothing hidden in this building gets called healing. "Put it up," she asked. I took the screwdriver from my pocket. Of course I had one. I always do. Together we fixed the plate beside the door, while the room behind us still held the warmth of bodies and sound. Then we stepped back to look at it. It wasn't dramatic, just brass on painted wood. 4 screws, straight enough. But I have come to believe that some of the holiest things in life are not dramatic. They are simply accurate in places that used to feed on distortion. That is how this ends for me. Not with the verdict, though the verdict mattered. Not with the cuffs, though the cuffs were deserved. Not with the live stream, though I would be lying if I said seeing Nathan Cole's face when his own words filled the sanctuary did not feed a part of me I no longer apologize for. It ends here. At a door that means what a door means. In a building where the windows open. Beside my daughter, whose name no longer has to travel through fake countries, donor language, or someone else's plan in order to be spoken aloud. The lie began because too many people found soft language more comfortable than a hard question. The truth returned because a boy told me where to look. My daughter stayed alive long enough to name the machine from inside it. And I finally learned that love, without inspection, is just permission for certain kinds of evil to invoice you forever. If I regret anything beyond the obvious, it is not only that I believed them, it is that I ever confused peace with goodness. I do not make that mistake now. Now when I lock up the workshop at night, I check the windows, kill the lights, and listen for the last note fading into the parking lot. And every single time I thank God for one simple thing. No attic, no story for sale, no hidden daughter, only music, honest receipts, and a door anyone can open from either side.